Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Hope you're ready for something that is just about interesting enough. And today we're going to be talking all about the assembly line. It's a journey through time and technology. It's assembly line. I mean, it's not the most interesting thing in the world, but that's kind of the point. This is just a relaxing few hours where we sit down, whatever you're using this for, just to chill out, background noise, to fall asleep to, whatever. That's what we're here for. So let's talk about the assembly line, shall we? In a cavernous factory hall, dawn-like glints off metal as a silent ballet of machines and workers begins. A chassis rolls slowly along a conveyor, stopping briefly at each station, where deft hands and robotic arms add engines, doors, and wheels. Seems like it's building a car, doesn't it? It's got to be a car. In less than 2 minutes, there we go, a completed car drives off the line. Just one of thousands produced that day. This scene, commonplace in modern manufacturing, is the culmination of a remarkable history from the mass-produced clay warriors of China's first emperor. Those are the ones buried, was it near Beijing, where there underground is thousands of these unique individual statues that were found, and I think there's still lots of stuff to be found in that giant underground mausoleum or tomb in China, where I think they can't go in there because there's too much mercury or something like that. Anyway, to Henry Ford's roaring Model T plant, to today's smart factories. Don't even know what a smart factory is. I suppose if you stay with us, you're going to find out. Now, the production line has revolutionized how we make things that shape our lives. Today, we're going to travel through centuries. We're going to cross industries, and we're going to uncover how the humble assembly line became an engine of civilization. The origins of the production line, from ancient workshops to industrial revolution. Now, the idea of breaking down production into sequential tasks, it's far older than the industrial age. Yeah, I mean, humans are kind of bound to, aren't we? When we do things over and over again, we think of ways to make them more efficient, to make them easier. If we're out there in the plains hunting a woolly mammoth or whatever, and we need our sharp sticks, we're not going to sharpen one stick and then take that with us. We'll sharpen a whole bunch of sticks at once. Maybe someone will become better at sharpening sticks, and we'll go from there. Next thing you know, you got a production line. Anyway, over 2,200 years ago in China, Emperor Qin Shi Huang commanded an army of life-size terracotta soldiers to be crafted for his tomb, and they were made using an early kind of assembly line. Oh, that's interesting. I kind of thought they were all uniquely produced, but I guess they apparently were made on an assembly line. Artisans produced standardized body parts using molds, and then they assembled each figure, achieving both uniformity and individuality. Wow. Okay, there you go. The result was astonishing. Some 8,000 warrior statues, each unique in detail, but built from common components. An achievement historian Francis Wood calls, and we'll quote him here, the most extraordinary example of creative mass production in the world. The quote ends. In essence, Qin's workshops ran on a proto-production line, with specialists focusing on heads, arms, legs, torsos, and then they'd fit them together to create an imperial army in clay. Well, that is a production line right there, 2,200 years ago. A little bit more recent than my stick sharpening example, but very impressive. Across the world, similar ideas surfaced whenever skilled labor sought to increase output. In the Venetian arsenal of the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, the bustling shipyards of Venice applied assembly line principles to shipbuilding. Founded around the 12th century, the arsenal eventually employed as many as 16,000 workers and could turn out nearly one warship per day at its peak. Wowee. I mean, I don't really know how big a warship was back then, but I don't know, it's got to have like cannons, and that's very impressive. On a slow-moving canal, hulls floated from one workshop to the next, each stop adding masts, oars, guns, and rigging from standardized stockpiles. By the 1500s, this arsenal could, and we're quoting here, fit out, arm, and provision a newly built galley with unprecedented speed. It was essentially a production line shipyard, assembling vessels from interchangeable parts centuries before the Industrial Revolution. This feat would not be seen again on such a scale until much later, earning the Venetian arsenal recognition as the world's first large-scale factory system. What about our terracotta warriors? I guess this is a little different. It's more happening in a factory, more organized, isn't it? Anyway, let's fast forward to the 18th century. This is where the conceptual foundations of the modern assembly line were first laid out by Enlightenment thinkers. 1776, economist Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. I studied this a long time ago, back at university, and I suppose secondary school as well, business economics. Anyway, Adam Smith described the power of dividing work into specialized tasks. His famous example of a pin factory, I remember this, illustrated how 10 men, each focusing on a specific step, drawing out wire, cutting it, adding the head, etc., could collectively produce 48,000 pins a day, a stupendous increase over what each one alone could do. Yeah, although if you're one of those pin makers, and you've been enjoying making pins, doing every part of it, and then suddenly they're like, oh yeah, no, you're actually just the guy who's gonna cut this one piece of metal over and over again until you go insane. Anyway, a Smith vividly recounted, or quote, one man draws out the wire, another straights it, a third cuts it, a fourth points it, and the important business of making a pin is, in this manner, divided into about 18 distinct operations. Wow, for making a pin. This division of labor was more than an abstract theory. It was an observation of real workshops. By fragmenting production into small, repeatable tasks, productivity could soar. Yet Smith also warned of a downside. A worker doing the same simple task all day might become as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become due to the mind-numbing repetition. Wow, kind of nailed that one, didn't he? A concern later echoed by critics of assembly line work. And there's a reason we still have assembly lines, because efficiency is so important. Like, we live in a capitalist society, don't we? If people are unhappy just cutting a piece of wire, we're going to work out a way to make them happier, or pay them enough, or just, drive them hard enough so that they will be super efficient, even at the cost of their own happiness. The economic logic of specialization was irresistible. Yeah, there we have it, exactly. Can't not do it once you figured it out, can you? You can't get back from making 48,000 pins a day to making, I don't know, whatever a stupendous decrease would be. This all promised to make mass production possible. Even before machines took over, innovators began applying these ideas to make products with interchangeable parts. In the 18th century, French gunsmith Henri Blanc pioneered the concept of manufacturing identical gun components so that any part would fit any gun of the same model. In a dramatic 1785 demonstration near Paris, Blanc disassembled 50 muskets, scrambled their locks, then reassembled new muskets from random pieces, proving that his parts were truly standardized. The display astonished onlookers. It's the sort of thing we'd find very dull today. We'd be like, well, of course, it'd be weird if they didn't fit. To use a modern example, I don't know, you'd be putting some new RAM in your computer or whatever, and you'd be like, oh, why doesn't this one fit? And it's like, well, it's artisanal RAM. It's just shaped slightly differently. It's not quite compatible. It'd be very annoying. It showed how precision tooling and division of labor could create uniform parts at scale. Blanc's methods, however, faced resistance in France's guild-dominated gun industry and were nearly lost amid the turmoil of revolution. Fortunately, though, the idea leapt across the Atlantic. Fortunately for society, I'm not so sure if that's fortunate for the poor gun makers who are now just going to be cutting wire instead of crafting guns. Like the idea of sitting down at a desk in a workshop or whatever. Maybe it's just because I don't really work with my hands at all. I don't work with my hands at all. I mean, my hands tap a keyboard. But the idea of sitting down and assembling a gun or crafting a gun with a lathe, I don't know, with a metalworking tools or whatever, I know nothing about this. It sounds appealing to me. But then the idea of just sitting in an assembly line and stamping the same piece of metal, pulling the same bit of wire, cutting the same thing over and over again, that sounds like the opposite of what I would want to be doing. Let's continue. The American ambassador to France, Thomas Jefferson, wasn't he president? Was Thomas Jefferson one of the early presidents? Or was he? Because he's on one of the monies, isn't he? Is he on the $2 bill? Am I imagining that? Anyway, he witnessed Blanc's demonstration and carried the concept home. In the young United States, arms factories like Springfield Armory embraced interchangeable parts, gradually developing what came to be known as the American system of manufacturing. By the mid-1800s, American inventors such as Eli Whitney, famous for the cotton gin, but also a proponent of standardized musket parts, and Simeon North were implementing division of labor and interchangeability in arms making. This meant that a broken part could be swapped out for a spare, and assembly could be broken into steps performed by semi-skilled workers rather than master craftsmen. The stage was set for mass production. All that was needed was a machine-powered boost. Yeah, combine that production line. Just the simplicity of it. Add some machines and you're going to have master craftsman level stuff at way lower cost. Do you think the people at the time just saw the inevitability of this, the people working in the factories? Do you think they saw where their jobs were going to go? Or do you think they denied it? Kind of seems bizarre, or the power of denial's pretty big. I bet they did deny it. I bet they thought they'd be fine. And then the next thing they know, no jobs. No more making guns. The dawn of assembly line in industry. As the Industrial Revolution gained steam in the 19th century, factories applied steam power and mechanization to multiply what human hands could do. Yet early industrial production was still often a painstaking process of assembly by hand. Skilled workers might spend days or weeks crafting a single product from start to finish. Yeah, that sounds satisfying to me. That sounds like something I could get behind. Not just stamping the same piece of metal 8 hours a day or 12 hours a day, or I don't know, however long they worked for back then. A few visionary manufacturers began to change that by organizing work more efficiently. An important early step came in the automobile industry, but not with Henry Ford, rather with Ransom E. Olds. In 1901, Ransom Olds, maker of the popular Oldsmobile curved dash car. Is Oldsmobile still around? Probably not, but I have heard of that, like there being Oldsmobile cars. I don't know if I've ever seen one. It seems very American to me. He patented the first true moving assembly line for the mass production of automobiles. Wow, he didn't seem to get the credit, did he? Kind of just everyone, I think, jumps to Henry Ford when you think about who created the car assembly line. I think some people even maybe think Henry Ford created the assembly line. I imagine we're going to learn this, but in my understanding was he just made it better. And he made it really good for cars. So, everyone could go get a car, get a Ford Model T. His method had workers remain at stations while the car in progress was moved from one workstation to the next. By implementing this system, Olds boosted his factory's output by 500% in a single year. So he's making 5 times as much stuff. It's kind of incredible. You can see why this was irresistible for companies, can't you? Instead of producing 3 or 4 cars a day, the Oldsmobile plant soon turned out 20 a day. This was the first instance of a modern assembly line in the automotive world, a fact often overshadowed by Ford's later achievements. Yeah, indeed, as we just talked about. Olds showed that assembling a complex machine like a car could be broken into discrete, sequential tasks performed in a continuous flow, dramatically increasing throughput. Other automakers took notice, including, of course, here he is for the first time, certainly not the last in this episode, Henry Ford. It was Henry Ford who truly perfected and popularized the moving assembly line on a massive scale. In 1913, at Ford's Highland Park plant in Michigan, the assembly of the Model T automobile was reorganized from top to bottom. Inspired in part by the disassembly lines he'd observed in Chicago slaughterhouses. Wow, I didn't know that. Where animal carcasses were butchered in stages along a conveyor. It's an interesting way of calling it the disassembly line. Butchery. Ford and his engineers reversed that concept to assemble cars. They installed conveyors and overhead trolleys to bring the work to the workers, rather than having the workers walk around the factory gathering parts. Each worker was assigned a specific, repetitive task, installing a particular bolt or connecting a particular wire as each car chassis rolled by in a steady progression. On October the 7th, 1913, the moving assembly line for the Model T chassis went operational, and the effects were immediate. Under this new system, the time to assemble a Model T plummeted from 12 hours to just 1 hour and 33 minutes per car. That's an enormous jump. I thought that 500% for Oldsmobile was impressive, but wow, Ford's really pumping out those Model Ts. By 1914, the Highland Park plant was churning out 1,000 cars a day, a scale of output unimaginable just a few years prior. Yeah, one location, one place in Highland Park. Oldsmobile were doing 20 with a 500% increase. Henry Ford comes along and he's like, nah, we'll do 1,000. Ford combined interchangeable parts with subdivided labor and a continuously moving chassis to create his moving assembly line. That's from a retrospective by the Henry Ford Museum, by the way. Now, these productivity gains were so dramatic that Ford was able to absolutely slash car prices and still exponentially increase profits. The Model T, once a luxury item, became affordable to the middle class, catalyzing the age of the automobile. Quoting notes on Ford's own corporate history, bringing the product to the worker overhauled the manufacturing industry as a whole. Yeah, and they are not overblowing that. It was a huge step forward. Yet the triumph of Ford's assembly line came with social turmoil on the factory floor. Workers, unaccustomed to the furious pace and mind-numbing repetition of the moving line, found it exhausting. Each man stood in one spot, performing the same 60 to 90-second cycle of tasks over and over all day as the line relentlessly pushed on. The work was monotonous and physically draining, and absenteeism and turnover skyrocketed as high as 380% annualized turnover in 1913, meaning that Ford had to hire almost 4 men to keep one job filled. I do feel that I'm a strange person in some ways. Like, I would do those 60 to 90 seconds and I'll just do them over and over again. And I'll be like, oh, I wonder how many I can do today. And I guess I'd get bored at some point, because I also get bored quite easily. But I don't know, I'd find little challenges in that. Maybe he'd just need to find people like that. Weird people. Just happy to do that. Hire a lot of them. The rest drop out, and eventually you've got a lot of people doing it and just doing it well. In early 1914, Henry Ford shunned the world by announcing a solution. He would pay his production workers $5 a day, twice the prevailing wage, and cut the workday to 8 hours. I wonder if the money made a difference. Because I think I've read that money isn't really a particularly, contrary to what you might think, money's not a particularly motivating factor. Like the 8 hours a day, which I think was cut down from 12 or 13, if I remember correctly. It's not in my notes here. It's I think that would be much more motivating. Anyway, this bold move, part social reform, part business strategy, had the immediate effect of reducing turnover and attracting droves of eager job seekers to Ford's gates. Yeah, you bet. Like, if you're looking at jobs, and like back in the day, people had to work miserable hours. Was it Henry Ford who, I think he did come up with this, the 8-hour workday? Was it 8 hours work, 8 hours play, 8 hours sleep? I think it was called like recreation, something else. But yeah, a fairly modern concept. Before that, people just had to work until they fell asleep or something like that. It's kind of a crazy time. I'm glad I'm alive today rather than back then, sort of labeling jars or sweeping chimneys or mining coal or stamping the same piece of metal over and over again for 13 hours. Anyway, a newspaper photo from 1914 shows quoting here, crowd of applicants outside Highland Park after $5 day announcement. This captured how truly revolutionary this was. Ford's wage increase also had a ripple effect by giving workers more income, which enabled them to become customers of the very products they made. Capitalism's kind of weird, isn't it? Famously encapsulated by the idea that Ford's employees could now afford to buy Model Ts. This was the birth of Fordism, a system of mass production coupled with better wages, which in theory created a virtuous cycle of high productivity, low unit cost, and rising consumer demand. Yeah, very, very clever. Ford's moving assembly line was an idea whose time had come, and it soon spread far beyond the Ford Motor Company. Competing automakers like General Motors and Chrysler adopted assembly line methods in the 1910s and 20s. The concept also jumped industries from radios to refrigerators. Manufacturers reconfigured their factories for flow production. By the 1930s, assembly line had entered the popular lexicon, even earning a satire in Charlie Chaplin's 1936 film Modern Times, where Chaplin's character comically struggles to keep up with an out-of-control moving conveyor. The assembly line had clearly become a defining feature of modern industrial life. Wartime production and global spread. If the interwar years established the assembly line in consumer goods industries, World War II demonstrated its world-changing potential. During the war, the United States took assembly line production to jaw-dropping heights to supply the arsenal of democracy. One iconic example was Ford's Willow Run plant in Michigan, built to assemble B-24 Liberator bombers. I know a lot of factories were repurposed to do other things during the war to support the war effort, but going from making Model Ts or whatever to B-24 Liberators, it's a lot bigger, isn't it? Applying automotive star mass production to aircraft was unprecedented. Bombers were as complex as they come, with 1.5 million parts each. Yet by 1944, Willow Run hit a stride of churning out one complete B-24 bomber every 55 minutes. That's incredible. That's not a car. That's a bomber plane. Wowee. At its peak, the plant produced 428 bombers in a single month. This feat, a bomber an hour, astonished observers. Wow, it astonishes me. Sitting here over 100 years later, and proved that assembly line principles could be applied even to huge, intricate projects like airplanes. An army of 42,000 workers, many of them women, toiled in shifts around the clock as the mile-long line of bombers in progress inched forward. The scale and urgency of war production accelerated innovations in logistics, quality control, and design engineering that might have otherwise taken decades. By the war's end, mass production expertise had spread to shipyards. Liberty ships were modularly built in sections and welded together at record pace, and nearly every kind of munitions factory. The war proved that assembly lines could be adapted to almost any product, and whichever nation mastered them could gain a strategic edge. Not hard to see why, is it? those Liberty ships sailing across the Atlantic, full of goods for the war in Europe, and those bombers being turned out one an hour. Before that, it'd be so slow. Whoever could, that production just gives whoever's doing it such a massive advantage. Anyway, after World War II, the assembly line went global. American manufacturing techniques, often with US technical assistance, were exported to rebuild war-torn economies in Europe and Asia. In the Soviet Union, automobile and tank factories, modeled on Ford's methods, had already been established in the 1930s, and Soviet industry continued to emphasize centralized mass production. In Western Europe, companies like Volkswagen in Germany and Citroën in France resurrected and refined assembly lines to motorize their populations. A notable post-war twist on Ford's system emerged in an unexpected place: Japan. Yeah, this was part of that was it the Japanese economic miracle or whatever? From like post-Second World War until the 90s, Japan's economy just grew absolutely. Wasn't there a point where Japan was the second largest economy in the world behind America? People were like, oh, Japan's going to take over. And then they had the what was it called? The Asian financial crisis? 1996? 1997 maybe? Anyway, in the 1950s, Japanese manufacturers, confronted with scarce resources and need to compete with more established Western companies, began to develop their own take on mass production. Most famously, Toyota Motor Corporation, under engineers like Taiichi Ohno, and inspired by the earlier ideas of Kiichiro Toyoda, invented what became known as the Toyota Production System, or TPS. I wonder if there were TPS reports associated with that Office Space reference. Great movie. Rather than maximize sheer volume at any cost, Toyota focused on efficiency and eliminating waste, or muda, in every step of production. Two pillars defined TPS: just-in-time production, which meant producing only what was needed, when it was needed, to avoid excess inventory, and jidoka, or automation with a human touch, which empowered machines and workers to halt the line at any sign of a quality problem. Interesting way to do quality control. Is this Kaizen? I remember studying this at university about 20 years ago. There was also wasn't there an American chap who, someone Dunning, who went over and helped with this system? These ideas were born out of necessity in post-war Japan's constrained economy, but they led to astonishing improvements in quality and flexibility. By the 70s, Toyota's methods enabled it to produce cars with far fewer defects and at a lower cost than American competitors, despite smaller production volumes. And it's interesting, I feel this is something we're beginning to see now occurring, not with Japan, but with China. I think when Japanese cars first, hit the scene and started becoming popular, like Toyota as we're talking about here, people didn't like them. They thought they were kind of cheap and unreliable and stuff. And Japan basically maybe not anymore, but there was a time when Toyota was just regarded as kind of bulletproof. I remember my first car was a Toyota, and I did not look after that car because, you're 17, 18 years old and you take it for a repair and they're like, should probably replace the cam belt on that. And you're like, well, how much is it? And they're like, no, it's £400. It's 20 years ago, so what, £700 today? And 17, 18-year-old Simon did not have £700 to spend on a cam belt. And I'd say, well, what's the worst that can happen? I think the car must have been worth about £2,000. So what's the worst that can happen? I was, well, if your cam belt goes, your engine's cooked. That's it. And I'm like, well, sounds like that's just a risk I'm going to have to live with. And my cam belt never went, and I drove the car for several more years. American and European automakers took note of Japan's success. In the 1980s, studies by MIT researchers, culminating in the 1990 book, The Machine That Changed the World, revealed that Toyota's lean production, as TPS came to be called, was fundamentally more efficient than traditional mass production. Lean factories used roughly half the human effort, half the manufacturing space, and half the inventory of equivalent mass production plants, while producing a greater variety of models with better quality. This realization sparked a global revolution in manufacturing management. Companies around the world, from Detroit to Dusseldorf, scrambled to implement lean techniques. Kanban cards. That's what I was thinking of. I was trying to think of the word for what this sort of Japanese Toyota-style production was called, and it's Kanban. And also Kaizen, something like that, to signal parts replenishment. Kaizen, that's continuous improvement. That's what I was thinking of. Kanban as well. Heard of that. These Kaizen teams to eliminate inefficiencies and flexible work cells instead of rigid assembly lines. By the dawn of the 21st century, Toyota's approach had become the new paradigm for production lines worldwide. The once almighty moving assembly line was now augmented by a philosophy of continuous improvement and respect for workers' ideas, closing some of the gap between the efficiency of machines and the creativity of humans. And you'd think, you'd almost be, it feels like you're going back a step, doesn't it? To go back to humans having opinions and terrible things like that on your production line. But turned out it just made, I can understand why there'd be better quality. I imagine the artisanal gunsmith or whatever was making pretty amazing quality guns, but they managed to put them both together and create something really special. How production lines work inside the modern assembly line. The evolution of the assembly line over centuries has led to highly sophisticated operations in today's factories. At its core, however, any production line, whether assembling ancient bronze weapons or the latest smartphones, rests on a few fundamental principles. These include division of labor, a steady flow of work, synchronization of tasks, and a system to ensure quality and fix problems. Exactly what we were talking about with the Japanese just a second ago. So now what we're going to do is peel back the curtain on the mechanics and organization of production lines. We're going to examine how tasks are separated and balanced, how the pace of work is set, how potential bottlenecks are managed, and how modern technology, from simple jigs to advanced robots, is woven into the fabric of the assembly line. We're also going to compare how these principles are adapted across different industries, from cars to clothing to chocolate bars. Yeah, you never think about it, really. The Kaizen, the continuous improvement, and it's like, well, it makes a sense when we're talking about like a plastic part on a car door. I mean, like, how does this apply to chocolate bars? Well, I guess we're going to find out. We're going to discover some continuously improving chocolate bars. That actually sounds pretty delicious. I could go for a chocolate bar right now. I'm on a diet. I'm watching my calories. It's been a long time since I've just enjoyed a chocolate bar. I'm more of a savory guy. Like, if I'm having bad calories, I'd much rather, got a bit of a soft spot for a Big Mac, something like that, rather than a chocolate bar. By understanding the inner workings, one can appreciate how production lines achieve their efficiency and why managing them is both a science and an art. The division of labor and task segmentation. The first ingredient in any assembly line is breaking the overall job into specialized tasks. This concept, as old as Adam Smith's pin factory, means that instead of one person crafting a whole product, each worker or machine on the line performs a defined step. In a modern context, this is often done through process engineering. Industrial engineers analyze the product's design and the manufacturing steps needed. Then they decompose it into a sequence of operations that can be assigned to workstations along the line. For example, consider an automobile assembly line. One station might install the engine onto the chassis. The next attaches the transmission. Another installs the wheels, another the doors, and so on. Upstream in the process, sub-assembly lines may build the engine itself out of smaller parts or prepare the dashboard module, etc., feeding into the main line at the appropriate point. Kind of reminds me of a river, all the little tributaries trickling into a main river as it flows down, and then at the end you got like a a big river, don't you? Or a big finished car or chocolate bar or whatnot. I've got to stop going on about chocolate bars. I want a chocolate bar. By dividing labour in this way, each worker becomes highly skilled at their specific task through repetition, and the product literally builds itself step by step as it flows from station to station. An effective assembly line usually requires that tasks be defined with great precision and simplicity. The idea is to eliminate unnecessary motions and complexity so that each operation can be done quickly and correctly. This idea was pursued by 20th century efficiency experts like Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, who conducted time and motion studies to find the one best way to perform a task. Their work, and that of Frederick Winslow Taylor, the father of scientific management, contributed to the hyper-efficient layouts of Fordist factories. In practice, this means assembly line tasks are often highly standardized. Every bolt tightened in exactly the same sequence, every wire harness connected in the same manner, often with specialized tools or fixtures to guide the worker. This ensures consistency, minimizes errors. As Henry Ford put it, quoting him here, "The best way is always the simplest way." Each workstation was optimized to perform its one job with minimal wasted effort. Yeah, I guess you put a lot of simple things together, you got a lot of simple tasks being done, and eventually you end up with something really complicated. A Model T is not exactly complicated compared to like a Tesla or something with all of its whizzes and bangs and stuff, but really, really complicated stuff still. Internal combustion engines, pretty complicated. Maybe we should do one of these about internal combustion engines and the history behind that. It's probably dull/just interesting enough, I reckon. If you're still here with me, let me know. Use the comments. Not right now, just relax. But maybe if you remember later. However, dividing tasks requires coordination. It's not enough to break the process into pieces. Those pieces have to mesh together in time. And this leads us to the importance of line balancing and timing, which ensures that each task takes roughly the same amount of time and that together they meet the desired production rate. Poor division of labor can lead to imbalances. One station might get overloaded with work, becoming a bottleneck, while others sit idle. Thus, determining what each station does is an iterative process. Tasks might be reallocated or split differently if one station is too slow or too fast relative to the others. Engineers often use tools like process flow charts and work combination tables to visualize and balance the workload across the line. Takt time, cycle time, and the rhythm of production. Every effective production line marches to a beat, a regular rhythm that synchronizes the work. In manufacturing, this drumbeat's often referred to as takt time, from the German word Taktzeit, meaning cycle time or meter. Takt time is essentially the pace of customer demand translated into the production process. If 240 products must be produced in an 8-hour shift to meet demand, the takt time is 8 hours divided by 240, which is 2 minutes per product. In other words, a finished unit should roll off the line every 2 minutes to satisfy orders. This takt time then dictates how fast each station must operate. I imagine we're going to get to this later in the episode, but I wonder how much of this is simply handled by machines nowadays. You picture those car plants. Picture like a car manufacturing plant in my head, and there's big robotic arms doing everything. There's not people standing around. I wonder how that's developed. I imagine there very much still are factories with lots of people on an assembly line, or the smart assembly line, or whatever the Japanese are up to. If there are, say, 10 stations on the line, ideally each station's work, its cycle time, should be about 2 minutes as well, so that every 2 minutes a product moves forward and one comes out the other end. Yeah, if one's taking longer or shorter, you're going to have hold-ups and bottlenecks and lack of efficiency. Setting the takt time gives managers a clear target. If the line falls behind, taking longer than takt, it risks not meeting demand. If it runs much faster, it could overproduce and build up unwanted inventory. In the Toyota production system, Takt time is a cornerstone of line design. It helps align production with customer demand. Workers can even refer to takt time clocks on some lines that tick down the time they have left to complete their task before the next unit should advance. Feels a bit dystopian in a way, just a big clock ruling every aspect of your day. I can see why people would find that rather demotivating in a way, just constantly fighting a clock. This creates a sense of urgency and rhythm. See, those two things, I like rhythm. I'm not so sure I like urgency. Urgency's stressful. Rhythm is calming. If you can just make it a rhythm, that sounds nice. Like, as long as the 2 minutes is like easily accomplishable in that time, that feels like the best of both worlds, doesn't it? Of course, real life's not always perfectly steady. Variability in tasks or slight hiccups means stations might sometimes take more or less time. So, a well-designed line also includes a bit of a buffer or slack and mechanisms to adjust. Seems all very sensible. The difference between cycle time and takt time is worth noting. Cycle time is how long each station actually takes to perform its work, or how long between completions at that station. Takt time is allowed time per unit based on demand. If cycle time exceeds takt time at any station, that station's going to hold up the line. Yeah, exactly. I feel like I said this a moment ago. It's like you've got to keep everything ticking along, keep that rhythm going. Conversely, if cycle times are all comfortably below takt, the line could potentially go faster or run fewer hours. In a balanced assembly line, cycle times are tuned to be just about equal to takt, perhaps slightly under to account for minor delays. Yeah, and I feel slightly under would also account for a more chill workforce. People happier that they're not being constantly pressed to whip something out as fast as possible. And I imagine in a factory environment, not rushing around is probably good for safety. Like, you're not gonna miss the hammer's not gonna miss the piece of metal you're battering or whatever and hit your thumb. And if that happens, I don't know, health and safety is going to be on you. Probably the whole line gets shut down, and then every 2 minutes you're not producing a thing, and then you got to worry about making it up, and then everyone rushes again, and more people hurt their thumbs, and, well, that's not a good thing. One tool used in managing this is the Anden cord or signal, which was pioneered by Toyota. If a worker cannot finish their task in the allotted time or encounters a problem, they pull the card to stop the line or alert a supervisor. This triggers immediate attention to fix the issue. While stopping the entire line might sound extreme, it's a key part of maintaining takt in the long run. It prevents defects or delays from cascading. Yeah, I was just thinking, that rhythm is a really good way of imagining this all, because if the rhythm breaks, if someone's off rhythm, then everybody else gets thrown off rhythm, don't they? So it kind of makes sense. Like, if one person has a problem, you got to stop everyone, and then you fix it and you don't let it happen again. Pretty clever, really. Production lines are clever. I mean, hopefully suitably boring for this, but also kind of amazing, right? By contrast, in early assembly lines, management often let the line run no matter what, and unfinished work would accumulate or defects would pass downstream, causing bigger problems later. Modern lines trying to stop this and fix problems as they happen, an approach that ultimately supports meeting the takt time reliably by preventing rework or breakdowns. Balancing the line and removing bottlenecks. Because an assembly line is only as fast as its slowest station, a lot of effort in operations goes into line balancing. This is distributing work evenly across stations to avoid any major bottleneck. And a bottleneck occurs when one stage of the process can't keep up with the flow, causing work to pile up behind it. For example, if station 5 on a 10-step line takes 3 minutes per unit, while all others take 2 minutes, station 5 is going to become a choke point. It's going to break that rhythm, isn't it? work in progress is going to queue up before station 5, and the whole line's output will slow to a 3-minute tag instead of 2. Managers use various strategies to solve such issues. They might reallocate tasks, take something away from station 5, give it to station 4 or station 6. If those have slack time, add another worker or a parallel operation at station 5, invest in faster tools at that station, or in some cases, split that task into 2 stations. It's all that Kaizen thing, isn't it? The continuous improvement, always looking at what's going wrong and trying to fix it. It's nice. It's a clever way of doing production. It's perhaps a clever way of living life. Every time you have some problem, identify what caused it. Try and fix it. To identify bottlenecks, one classic method is observe work in progress, or WIP inventory accumulation. If parts are stacking up in front of a station, it's a red flag that the station's slower than the rest. Conversely, if a station is frequently idle waiting for work to arrive, it's underloaded relative to others. The goal is to reach a smooth flow where each station finishes its job just as the next unit arrives with minimal waiting or queuing. Perfect balance is hard to achieve in practice due to small variations and human factors, but continuous improvement efforts in factories constantly seek to get closer to that ideal. Feels almost oddly religious in a way, just constantly striving for an ideal. I'm not really sure why that's religious. It just feels like there's a lot, In some systems, a pulsed or indexed assembly line is used rather than a continuously moving conveyor. In a pulsed line, products move in discrete steps. The line stops at fixed intervals. The takt time while work is done, then all units advance together to the next position. Well, that's interesting. I didn't even know things were made that way. This approach can give workers a stationary object to work on, which can be easier than working on a moving target, and a clearly defined window to complete their tasks. Many modern automotive lines use this pulsed movement. The car bodies halt at each station for, say, a 60-second interval of work, then index forward simultaneously. Oh, well, I have to say that's how I assumed it would work. I didn't think that the car was literally moving continuously along a line during the whole process. It was really actually moving. I feel that would be a lot harder for people and machines to work with. Okay. This still requires balance. Each station must finish in those 60 seconds, but it alleviates the need for workers to walk or for moving platforms. In other cases, especially for small teams, the conveyor belt may move continuously at a slow speed and workers perform their assembly steps on the fly, as seen in some electronics or packaging lines. I suppose, I used to watch those, a long time ago on YouTube, those How It's Made videos. I think they were on Discovery Channel back when I was a kid. And it was often about food. They'd talk about frankfurters or sweets and stuff like that. And they'd always be moving. And then you'd have factory workers or whatever, and they'd be picking things out. I remember my mum worked in a chocolate factory when she was a kid. It was like a summer job. And she was like, yeah, it was great. And I'm like, working in a factory? And she's like, yeah, you could just eat as much chocolate as you wanted. And I'm like, that does sound really good. And you're a kid, you're a teenager. You can basically, at least, I don't know, feel like I got into my 30s and then it was like, I can no longer eat whatever I want all the time. But before then, I'd have liked the chocolate factory job, just assuming it's good chocolate. I really don't like some chocolate. Do you guys like dark chocolate? I like dark chocolate, but then once it gets to 80%, my parents are into this. Whenever I go stay at my parents, they're always, you want some chocolate? You want a little chocolate after dinner? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And then they break out the weirdest chocolate. They'll break out chocolate with 95% cocoa content that doesn't taste like chocolate. It just tastes like bitterness. Just bitterness. And then they'll also have these ones with, 95% cocoa and chili flakes. And I'm like, chocolate was fine. Weren't we happy with 40% and like not having chili flakes? Although then they were like, try this one with salt in it. And I was like, whoa, that's actually delicious. If only it wasn't like 95% cocoa, then I could actually properly enjoy this. And since that time, I've found chocolate with salt in it that is not 95% cocoa. And I enjoy that, especially from the Lindt company. Lindt makes amazing chocolate. It's too expensive, but it is very good. Another concept used to optimize flow is the theory of constraints, or TOC, and this was popularized by Elijah Goldratt's book, The Goal. TOC advises identifying the primary bottleneck or constraint in the production system and then reorganizing the operation to support and elevate that constraint. Not sure what that means. In assembly line terms, this might mean deliberately setting one station as the pacemaker. Oh, okay. Often the slowest, but necessary step, and then ensuring no other step starves it or blocks it. The line could run at the pace of this constrained station, while improvements focus on relieving that station's burden to raise overall throughput. This is a more strategic view, whereas line balancing tries to make everything equal. TOC accepts that something will be the weakest link and focuses on managing it optimally. Ensuring quality, inspection, and jidoka. Making something quickly is pointless if it's done wrong. Quality control has therefore always been a critical aspect of production lines. In the early days of mass production, quality was often enforced by end-of-line inspection. Armies of inspectors would check the finished products and send defective ones for rework or scrap. Wow, I kind of just assumed that's how you do it today. I wonder how they do it today. This was necessary in Ford's era, as the emphasis was on hitting production numbers, and sometimes errors would indeed be passed down the line. However, this approach leads to waste, time spent fixing machines, materials discarded, etc. Over time, manufacturers realized that building quality into the process was far better than inspecting bad quality at the end. I suppose, but even if you've got it really perfected, sometimes there's going to be flaws and bugs. I mean, I feel like I've received plenty of products that have some sort of manufacturing error or problem. Maybe because they got rid of this quality assurance at the end and just leave it to the customers to return the products. That doesn't seem very efficient, though. I'm sure it is. I'm sure they've thought it through more than I've thought it through. Modern assembly lines incorporate quality checkpoints throughout the process and empower workers to ensure quality at the source. A famous principle of the Toyota production system is jidoka, often translated as automation or automation with human intelligence. On assembly lines, jidoka means machines are equipped with sensors to detect anomalies. For example, a robot senses if a part is misaligned, or a torque wrench verifies if a bolt is properly tightened, and they halt if a part is misaligned or there's other problems. It also means human operators are given the authority to stop the line if they notice a problem. In many factories, if a worker spots a defect or a potential issue that they can't fix within their cycle time, they'll pull an andon cord. Oh, that was one of those things we talked about earlier that will, if I remember rightly, either stop it or alert a supervisor, right? This lights up a board or plays a melody. Well, that's nice, to alert the team that assistance is needed. Although I can imagine that melody would begin to drive you batty after a short while, wouldn't it? If the issue isn't resolved by the end of the cycle, the entire line may stop until it's corrected. While counterintuitive, this stop-and-fix mentality ensures that problems are addressed at their source rather than propagated. I don't know if it's counterintuitive, to be honest. I mean, short-term, it's going to slow things down, but long-term, it's going to make everything better. I'm really someone who's like, I'll go to extraordinary efforts one time to do something if it means then I don't have to spend like 20 seconds a day doing it for the rest of my life or for years or something like that. Quality control on the line also involves systematic inspection and testing at certain stages. For example, a car assembly line will have quality gates where critical functions are tested, a station where engines are fired up for the first time to check for leaks or issues, a water test booth where the car is sprayed to ensure seals are good. I've seen that done, where it's to make sure, if it's raining that your car's not going to leak, and they absolutely pound these cars with jet washers, which makes sense because, you're going to jet wash your car at some point, aren't you? And if the water's getting in there, no one's going to be very happy. I wouldn't be very happy. I'd be quite upset. My car got called in for a recall. I don't even know what it's for. In fact, my wife's car also has been called in for a recall, and they have to go overnight to the dealership to have something fixed, and it's a pain in the ass, isn't it? Pain in the ass. In electronics assembly, there may be optical inspections or automated tests like powering on a circuit board to run diagnostics partway through the line. By catching defects early, these inline tests prevent adding more labor to a faulty unit. Statistical quality controls are another practice woven into assembly lines since the mid-20th century. Techniques like control charts, pioneered by Walter Schuhart in the 1920s, allow processes to be monitored for variability. Workers or automated systems take measurements, for instance, the torque of a bolt or the gap alignment of a car door at regular intervals, and plot them. If the measurements begin to drift out of a preset control range, it signals that the process might be getting out of whack. Maybe a tool is wearing out or miscalibration has occurred, and corrective action can be taken before bad products result. W. Edward Deming. That's the guy. Remember earlier I was talking about a guy called Deming who went over to Japan? And Joseph Duran, American quality gurus, taught these methods to Japanese industry in the 50s. Yeah, I learned about this at university, I still remember the lecture hall where I had those lectures. Honestly, not the most interesting thing in the world. It's kind of the point of this, isn't it? Who would have thought that 20 years later, that's what I'll be doing? 15 years later, I'm not sure. When did I go to university? 2005 to 2008. Yeah, graduated 2008. Nowadays, many assembly lines have computer systems collecting such data in real time. Quality engineers analyze this data to implement improvements and prevent defects. The motto is often quality at the source. Each station is responsible for the quality of its own output, never passing on a known defect to the next station. When every step acts as a quality checkpoint for the previous one, the final product will, ideally, have zero defects. I imagine, statistically, there's always going to be some defects. I mentioned, sometimes you just get a product and it doesn't work. Sometimes you buy a piece of electronics or something, it's just, this doesn't turn on, does it? I had an embarrassing one the other day. I bought an uninterruptible power supply, which is a device which, if you have a power cut, it keeps your computer on so you can save your work, or you can, not have things just shut down immediately. Apparently it's not good for computers. Bought this thing, plugged it all in, was setting it all up, and I'm like, fantastic, let's turn it on. And it just doesn't work. And I'm like, why is it not working? And so I return it, and I get another one, and it's like, it doesn't work. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll read the manual. So I read the manual, and I hadn't pulled out. There was just a little tab at the bottom that you need to pull out to activate it, and I felt like a right idiot. Especially because I complained to the store. I was like, it's not really cool, guys. Because I had for whatever reason, the one I'd ordered was, box open. Like someone had bought it and returned it. And I've had issues with this store before where that's often, their quality control process was not very good. You'd return the product. I think they'd just box it up and just make it the next customer's problem. And so I was already in a position of this is probably not going to work. And it didn't. And I was upset, and then it turns out I'm the idiot. And I imagine so was the previous person who unboxed it, thought it didn't work and returned it and passed on the problem to me, which ended up not being a problem at all. Automation, robotics, and human-machine collaboration. One of the most striking features of modern production lines is the presence of machines doing work that humans once did. Automation in assembly lines ranges from simple conveyors and power tools to advanced robotic arms and AI-driven vision systems. The push to automate repetitive or heavy tasks started really early. Even Henry Ford used conveyor belts and gravity slides. Is there another type of slide? Don't think slides work upwards, do they? To minimize human effort in moving materials. But the true robotic revolution began in the second half of the 20th century. In 1961, General Motors installed the first industrial robot arm called Unimate on a production line. Unimate's job, you see, was to handle hot die-cast metal parts, an unpleasant and dangerous task for humans. It performed it reliably, heralding a new era where machines could assemble machines. Yes, the next thing you know, Skynet. Over the following decades, industrial robots became common on assembly lines, especially in the automotive sector. Today, auto factories are famous for their robotic ballet of giant orange arms welding car bodies together in a shower of sparks. For some reason, in my mind, the robots are always white, moving around, these like white and black robots. But I guess there are orange ones. These robots are ideal for tasks that are dirty, like welding fumes, dangerous, like lifting heavy car body panels or stamping metal, or simply highly repetitive and precise, like applying a continuous weld or a perfect bead of sealant. So basically, anything that humans are not very good at. God, we're just going to be replaced, aren't we? We got replaced in factories, and the next thing you know, we're going to be replaced with ChatGPT and his ilk. By the 1980s, Japanese and European car plants were racing to increase automation in body shops and paint shops. And modern cars' body shells typically welded and assembled almost entirely by robots, with dozens of articulated arms working in concert inside safety cages. Safety cages also, so they don't escape and take over the world. The benefit's not just labor saving. Robots can often work faster and with greater consistency. They don't get fatigued. They don't need coffee breaks. They also allowed processes that would be hard for humans, such as precisely welding very high-strength steels or performing 500 spot welds on a body with exact repeatability. Yeah, and I don't think robots, there's no robot unions. Imagine like Jeff Bezos. No, he's not the CEO of Amazon anymore, but whoever's CEO of Amazon, like sitting in their car still being like, unions, huh? Well, joke's on them. They're all going to be replaced with robots before they can unionize. Business. However, not every part of an assembly line is easy to automate. Final assembly of cars, where interiors are installed, wiring is connected, trim and electronics are fitted, still relies heavily on human dexterity. Yeah, I recently fitted a new stereo in a car I own. It's an old car. It had this, one of those GPS systems from the early 2000s, which just don't update. And so you'll be driving along a highway and it's insistent that you're driving through a field in the middle of nowhere because the highway's been built in its entirety and aged and become potholed since the time that the GPS system was put together. And putting that in, there's a lot of intricate finger movements and attaching tiny little wires to tiny little places. And granted, this was more than just, slotting in a new stereo. It was a more complicated system. It's a big touch screen, actually. It's really cool. And I say that I did it. I tried to do it, and then I failed. And I broke the screen, smashed the screen doing it. And so I bought another one. And I failed at doing that as well. And then I was like, all right, I sent it to the electrician. Sent it off to the car shop, and they fitted it in about an afternoon. Probably they did it in 20 minutes. They just billed me for an afternoon. But they probably took the whole afternoon. It's a complicated thing. But yeah, lots of little delicate hand movements putting that thing in. In recent years, a new paradigm of human-robot collaboration has emerged. Rather than robots being caged off for isolated tasks, factories are introducing cobots. That stands for collaborative robots, apparently, and they can work side by side with people. These machines are equipped with sensors and safety features to operate at slower speeds and stop if they contact a person. Have you ever seen I feel like I know the thumbnail more than I actually know the video itself, but there's a thumbnail showing how a circular saw will stop on contact with a finger, like so your finger doesn't get chopped off. There'll be I think there might even be a little explosive bolt that blows and jams the circular saw, like a one-time use safety thing, which, I mean, honestly, even if that thing's like hundreds of dollars for a one-time use, to save yourself a finger, probably worth it. Seems like a really good thing to have on your circular saw if you can afford it. And if you can't, well, hopefully you can afford that medical bill. I imagine getting a finger stitch back on is quite pricey. I mean, speaking of Americans, for me it would be free. I live in Europe. They'll put your fingers back on, no charge. But it shows like a frankfurter or a hot dog being pressed up against a blade that's spinning, and the blade stops before it's even scratched the frankfurter. And I'm like, that's really impressive. I don't even know how it works. It's got something to do with like electrical conduction or something. Like the blade can sense even just the slightest brush of a cell against it. It's really cool. Cobots can handle simple or strenuous tasks on a line. For instance, a cobot might hold a position, a heavy part for a worker to fasten, or perform repetitive screw driving while the worker does more nuanced fitting. This allows a blending of human judgment with machine endurance. The vision of Industry 5.0 even emphasizes, I don't know what Industry 1.0 was. We're already on Industry 5.0. Internet's got some catching up to do. What internet are we on nowadays? Is it we were on 1 and then 2? What was 2? When we started interacting more with the internet and like social media and stuff? What's 3? Whatever the hell TikTok is? The vision of Industry 5.0 even emphasizes the human-centric collaboration, bringing more human creativity into the loop alongside automation. And automation's not only about physical work, it also includes digital automation. Modern production lines are monitored and controlled by computer systems, the realm of industrial IoT or Internet of Things. Something I've been messing around with a lot lately, been setting up a smart home, to make the blinds go up and down and the television turn off at night, that kind of thing. Sensors track everything from the torque on each screw to the temperature and humidity in the plant. The data streams into software that can automatically adjust the line's speed, reorder part supply, or alert maintenance crew when a machine is due for service. In cutting-edge facilities, digital twins of the production line exist. Oh, that's really cool. Virtual replicas that simulate the entire process in real time. Engineers can test changes on the digital twin or predict issues before implementing them in the real world. I saw an incredible example of this being talked about the other day. It was to do with self-driving cars and how they want to train the self-driving cars on cities and traffic and all of this stuff, but obviously that's risky and expensive. So I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Tesla or one of the giant car companies. And they just made like a digital mock-up of a city, kind of like, I don't know, I imagine San Andreas for Grand Theft Auto. And they just trained, they digitized their cars and they put them on this computer and just trained them on this digital mock-up of the city with traffic and random acting pedestrians and stuff, and just sped it up and just trained them for like years equivalent, just driving around this virtual city learning to become better. And I'm like, that's kind of genius, whoever came up with that. For example, a digital twin of an automotive assembly line can simulate how a new model variant will flow or whether a proposed speed increase will cause congestion at a particular station. These tools, part of the Industry 4.0 toolkit, enhance the flexibility and responsiveness of assembly operations. Despite all the high-tech intervention, humans are still very much in the picture. They design the processes, improve them, and often still perform the final quality judgment. As automation has increased, the role of a factory worker has shifted in many places from pure manual labourer to more of a technician or operator role, managing automated equipment, performing quality checks, and handling exceptions. In a fully realised Industry 4.0 smart factory, machines handle the routine production while people oversee and optimize the system. I wonder if that's where we're heading with this whole AI stuff. Are humans going to be replaced? Probably not. I think people have thought we're going to be replaced for a long time. You know, in factories, driving cars and stuff like that. It just moves real slow. I think we'll just move from, it'll just be more efficient work, which also means just a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. But not for a while yet, I shouldn't think. Yet the human touch remains crucial. As one Industry 5.0 advocate put it, the goal is not to replace humans, but to leverage their unique skills, intuition, and creativity alongside machines. The assembly line of the future might therefore look less like a hive of human drones or a sea of robots, and more like a well-choreographed team of humans and machines, each doing what they do best. Yeah, I really think, computers are pretty bad at stuff. Humans are pretty bad at stuff. But when humans and computers work together, we really do some pretty incredible things. I think for the longest time, computers couldn't beat chess grandmasters, right? I mean, now they obviously can. That's, your iPhone couldn't beat Magnus Carlsen. But I think early days of that, it was that the strongest players were a computer playing with a human, like the computer assisting the human in the gameplay. And that was a lot more powerful than a individual or a team of individuals or a team of computers or a super powerful computer. It was the combination of man and machine really making for the best option. Differences across industries. One size does not fit all. While the general principles of assembly lines apply broadly, different industries tailor those principles in unique ways. Let's tour a few sectors to see how production lines differ in character. Automotive industry. Auto assembly lines are the poster child of mass production. In a typical car plant, the line is long and segmented into major areas. A body shop, or welding and body assembly by robots, a paint shop for automated painting, and a trim and final assembly line where humans and some robots install the guts of the car. A car moves from a bare metal shell to a driving vehicle in a matter of hours as it travels miles of conveyor systems. Automotive lines often handle mixed model production, different car models or configurations on the same line. Oh, I didn't know that. I kind of assumed when a car company, especially like a major car company, releases a new model, they set up a whole different production line. But I guess that would be a little bit crazy. There's a lot of different models and lots of different specs on different models. Like, I don't know, maybe they got a sunroof, maybe they don't. I wonder how they handle that. I wonder if the sunroof would be like stamped out later at some point, or whether that's made on a different line. Or interesting. Automotive lines often handle mixed model productions, car models or configurations on the same line, which requires flexible tooling and smart scheduling. They also achieve impressive throughput. The fastest automotive assembly lines today can produce a finished car roughly every 45 to 90, and I would be impressed if that number was minutes. 45 to 90 minutes, but it's not. It's 45 to 90 seconds, although 1 to 2 minutes per car is more common. So why are cars so bloody expensive? This means hundreds of thousands of vehicles per year from one plant. Automation is extremely high in welding and heavy lifting tasks. For instance, installing a car's heavy seats or windshield might be done by robotic assists or gantries, but fine work like clipping in electrical conductors or testing systems is still human performed. Automobile assembly also has a well-developed system of in-process testing. Every car's engine must be fired briefly on the line, brakes tested, lights checked, to ensure each vehicle leaving is road ready. A stop at the end of the line is often a roll test, dynamometer, where each car's engine and drivetrain are run in a sort of mini road test. The complexity and safety-critical nature of cars make quality paramount, so auto assembly lines tend to have many quality gates and error-proofing devices called poka-yoke in Japanese manufacturing. Another aspect is the supply chain. Auto lines rely on just-in-time delivery of thousands of parts, often from suppliers located nearby, arriving in sequenced order to match the production schedule. For instance, the exact color of the seats for car with VIN 123 arrives just before that car comes to the seat install station. This coordination is a marvel in itself. Yeah, we should do one of these about global logistics, how stuff moves around the world and gets from a factory in wherever, someplace in China, probably, to your doorstep with Amazon or something like that. It's really impressive and probably suitably dull for one of these episodes. Consumer electronics. Think of the smartphone in your pocket or the laptop you use. They're products of intricate assembly lines combining both automated and manual operations. Electronics manufacturing typically has two main phases. One, PCB, or printed circuit board assembly, where tiny electronic components like chips, resistors, etc. are mounted onto circuit boards. And two, final product assembly, where those boards, along with batteries, screens, casings, and other parts, are assembled into the finished device. PCB assembly is highly automated with pick-and-place machines that can mount parts on a board at blinding speed and ovens to solder them, a process known as SMT, or surface mount technology. One SMT line can place tens of thousands of components per hour with incredible precision, far beyond human ability. Yeah, like I solder things occasionally, working on a little project or whatever, usually something to do with the aforementioned smart home. Soldering's tricky. It's like it's a fine motor skill, and that's on a big scale. Like, even when you're working on a circuit board, it's big. You don't need a magnifying glass to take a look at it. These machines, I mean, they're just working with something that is just incredibly tiny. However, when it comes to putting together the device, a lot of electronics manufacturing still uses human assembly line workers. Factories run by companies like Foxconn in China employ hundreds of thousands of workers who sit or stand along conveyor belts assembling smartphones, tablets, and other gadgets by hand. Each worker might perform a simple action like inserting a connector, attaching a flex cable, or screwing in a tiny screw that secures a component. Now you're thinking, well, why so much manual work? Well, it's partly because consumer electronic models change very frequently. Every year there's a new phone, making it hard to justify fully automated lines that might become obsolete. Also, the products are small and delicate, requiring fine motor skills. I feel like, just there's robots with fine motor skills. I bet finer motor skills than humans, like those keyhole surgery machines, where it's like the surgeon's working on like a big model and then it just scales down to these tiny little machines doing all of this work inside somebody. Quite incredible stuff. Nonetheless, automation is gradually increasing here too. Robot arms with vacuum pickups can assist in placing components, and automated guided vehicles, or AGVs, deliver trays of parts to workstations. Testing is crucial in electronics. At various points, devices or sub-assemblies are connected to testing rigs to verify circuitry, and at the end, each device might undergo a boot-up test or camera calibration, etc. Yields need to be high because volumes are enormous. Imagine a single factory outputting 500,000 smartphones a month. Wow, that's a lot of stuff. Electronics assembly lines also incorporate cleanroom conditions for certain steps, especially if dealing with semiconductor components or optical parts. Yeah, cleanrooms must be very useful. I mean, if you ever put a screen protector on your phone and then you got that little bloody piece of dust stuck underneath there and you're like, oh, come on, I was like trying to squeeze it out and you eventually just give up and it's under there forever. I feel like I should put my screen protectors on in a clean room. In fact, I kind of gave up with screen protectors because they were such a pain in the ass. And I just accept that my phone's kind of just going to get scratch to shit after a while. Food and beverage processing. Here, assembly lines often take the form of continuous processing lines. Consider a bottling plant for a soft drink. The assembly is largely filling and packaging. Giant mixing tanks prepare the beverage, which is then pumped into a filling line. Hundreds of empty bottles per minute are rinsed, filled with liquid, capped, and then sent to labeling machines and case packers in rapid sequence. These lines are typically fully automated. You might see a blur of bottles on conveyors with only a few operators overseeing the process. The tasks, filling, capping, labeling, are done by specialized rotary machines that handle multiple bottles in parallel to achieve high throughput. Quality in food production is all about sanitation and consistency. Sensors check fill levels in each bottle. Machines reject any underfilled or miscapped bottles from the line. Date codes are laser printed on each package automatically. Workers in these plants mainly monitor the equipment, clear jams, and perform quality sampling, like checking carbonation levels or performing taste tests from random samples. I was about to make a joke there that maybe they're just like tasting the chocolates to make sure that they're good, but it turns out that's exactly what they're doing, because robots can't taste. Another example, the chocolate bar factory. Here, you have a cooking stage, melting and mixing ingredients, then a molding line where chocolate bars are formed in molds, cooled, popped out, and then an assembly line of wrapping and cartoning. Much of this is continuous with machines, though there may be stations where workers add in inserts or toppings by hand, depending on the product. Food lines also need frequent cleaning, so they're built for quick disassembly and washdown. This can interrupt production. For example, meat processing might run for several hours, then stop for thorough sanitation. Compared to automotive, the cycle times are much faster, items per second, but the complexity per item is usually lower. I imagine the complexity around health and safety is also a major thing, because car health and safety, I feel, well, once you've got it designed, you just make it and it's going to be as safe as it was designed. Whereas food, if your production line gets some salmonella or whatever on it, it's going to be a really bad time. Textile and apparel manufacturing. I was saying the word apparel as apparel for the longest time, and I don't know where I got that pronunciation from, but now I hear people say apparel, and some people will say apparel, and I'm like, oh, not just me making that mistake. I've got that the right way around, right? Apparel, apparel. It does sound odd, doesn't it? Making clothes remains a largely labor-intensive process, often organized as progressive bundle system, a form of assembly line. For example, in a garment factory, rolls of fabric are first cut into pattern pieces using automated cutters that can slice through dozens of layers of fabric at once. Once you have stacks of pieces, sleeves, collars, fronts, backs, etc., they move to sewing lines. A typical sewing line might have 20 to 30 sewing machine operators in a row. Oh, wow. I assumed that most of this was automated these days, but you still got people stitching stuff together. I mean, using machines and whatnot. Pretty cool. Each operator performs one seam or attachment, then tosses the semi-finished garment to the next. One person might sew shoulder seams, the next attaches sleeves, another hems the bottom, another adds buttons or zippers, and so forth. The garment progresses until it's fully assembled, and then it gets pressed and packed. Unlike hard product assembly lines, these are less mechanized. The conveyor is often just people handling bundles along, though some factories use overhead hanger systems, moving garments from station to station. The big challenge in apparel is the flexibility of fabric. It's floppy, and each piece can be slightly different. Robotics have struggled to handle cloth, which is why automation is limited. Well, isn't there a way to make the fabric non-floppy so machines can work with it in not applying starch or something, but couldn't you just dampen the clothes and then freeze them and then have the machines work with them like that, and then they'll defrost, the water will evaporate, and boom, finished garment. I mean, it's not like rocket science to work out how to make fabric not not flexible. No? Well, look, I don't know what I'm doing. I just read. That's what I do. I just read. I don't know anything about apparel manufacturing. But I don't know, I'd be freezing that. Recently, there have been advances in sewing robots that use machine vision to guide fabric under sewing needles, but these are still emerging. Apparel production also has very short product cycles, fashion seasons, so lines must adapt to new styles frequently. Much apparel assembly has been offshored to low-wage countries, specifically because it's hard to automate, making labor costs the biggest factor. Yeah, it's interesting, a lot of clothes you buy will say made in Vietnam. I think it's a big one. China, obviously. I lived in Sri Lanka for a year, and they do a lot of clothes manufacturing there. And it was interesting. There were these stores you could go to. They were called No Limit, where I think they just had all of the rejects from these big factories. So you'd go in and they'd have a bunch of jeans that are clearly Levi's jeans, but they've all had the labels cut off. So the little red sticker at the back, that sits on the back pocket has been just cut off. And there's the little red bit still remaining there because they can't sell the branded clothes, obviously. They would just get dumped in these No Limit stores, which were these huge, multi-story complexes just with bins and bins of clothes in them. And it was all insanely cheap. I can't quite remember, but even back then, and I didn't have very much money. And even then I was like, whoa, this is ridiculously cheap. I swear, maybe it was $2, $3 for a pair of jeans. And I wasn't even sure what was wrong with them. Maybe it was just, I don't know, the stitching was slightly out of place somewhere or something had gone wrong, but I don't know. Yeah, so Sri Lanka. Turkey's another big one. And then when you buy some nice expensive clothes and it'll say made in Italy or made in, Great Britain, and you're like, oh wow, this is fancy. Using that European labor, huh? Quality control is done by inspection, checking random pieces or each piece at end of line for sewing defects, loose threads, or sizing issues. Despite being labor heavy, the process is indeed an assembly line. A shirt or pair of pants goes through a sequential creation from pieces to finished article, with each person adding a component or stitch. Pharmaceuticals and chemicals. These industries often use continuous production lines that are a bit different in nature. For pills, tablets and capsules, production is batch-oriented, but with assembly line elements. First, large batches of powder or granules are mixed, the active drug, with excipients, and then pressed into tablets by machines or filled into capsules. After that, packaging becomes the assembly line. Tablets are fed into bottling lines or blister pack machines at high speed, much like a food packaging line. A blister pack machine, for instance, will form the plastic blisters, drop a pill into each, seal them with foil, and cut them into card sizes in one continuous line. Pharmaceutical lines have to meet stringent validation and cleanliness standards, often run in clean rooms. There are typically many in-process checks. Weight sensors ensure each tablet is the correct mass. Vision systems check that each blister has a pill. Metal detectors ensure no foreign metal got into a batch. Yeah, I feel the same with food. Anything that you're putting inside your body rather than on your body or around you should, needs much bigger health and safety checks. The assembly line here is as much about packaging as production, but some advanced plants are moving toward continuous drug manufacturing, where the chemical synthesis of the drug, its formulation into dosage form, and its packaging all flow one into the next. Wow, actual synthesis? I kind of assumed that would be, done in a lab, and then they have a big vat of ibuprofen or whatever, and then it goes off to another factory who stamp it into pills and put it into liquids and however else you can take ibuprofen. If you're French, possibly in your bottom. Is that still something the French do? I remember being a kid, and it was kind of a joke that the French, they didn't swallow pills, they just put the pills in their butt. This is an ongoing innovation. Traditionally, drug making had many stop-and-go steps with lab analysis in between, but new technology is enabling more continuous flow chemistry and formulation. Another example is car manufacturing versus airplane manufacturing. often contrasted because airplanes, until recently, were made in stationary positions, with teams coming to the plane. However, even Boeing and Airbus have adopted moving line concepts for smaller planes. The 737, which is a smaller plane, has a moving assembly line in Renton, Washington, that slowly inches the fuselages along as workers inside assemble wiring and interiors, demonstrating that even in aerospace, the line concept has value, albeit at a slower pace. That's hours per station, not minutes. Oh yeah, planes are absolutely vast. Even a 737 as a small plane is a big thing. That's the kind of puddle jumper, the short haul route. 737 and the A320 from Airbus seem to be always the ones that, when you're hopping on a Ryanair flight somewhere. Or I don't know, what's the American equivalent of Ryanair? Southwest? We can summarize some of the differences in a comparative way. Each sector adapts the assembly line to its needs. Continuous flow and sanitation dominate food lines. Flexibility and fine manual work remain in apparel. Precision and miniaturization define electronics lines. Heavy automation with safety reign in automotive, and regulatory precision guides pharma production. Despite differences, all these production lines share the common goals of efficiency, consistency, and scale that the assembly line paradigm brings. Yeah, I was saying earlier how food production must be so strictly controlled because, you get a little salmonella on that food line and, well, it's all gone terribly wrong, hasn't it? But pharmaceuticals, they get just the amount of that drug wrong, in that case, either too little or too much, and that can kill someone. And I mean, salmonella kills people, but taking the wrong amount of a drug, oof. Beyond the factory, the impact of production lines on society. The rise of the production line did more than revolutionize factories. It transformed economies and societies. As goods went from handcrafted rarities to mass-produced commodities, everyday life fundamentally changed. In this section, we're going to zoom out from the factory floor to examine the broader implications of the assembly line. We're going to see how it gave birth to new consumer culture, altered the nature of work, sparking debates about labor conditions and the role of workers, reshaped global trade patterns, and even affected the environment. The production line is not just a technical system, it's a social system too. Its development raised pressing questions. Do assembly lines make work alienating, or do they uplift incomes and skills? How did mass production contribute to the prosperity of some nations and the exploitation of others? What are the environmental costs of producing millions of products at breakneck speed, and can those costs be mitigated? In exploring these questions, we're going to hear perspectives from historians, economists, and the workers themselves. The assembly line story, you see, is intertwined with the story of the modern world, with all its abundance, as well as its challenges. Mass production and consumer society. One of the clearest impacts the production line has been the advent of affordable consumer goods on a massive scale. When Henry Ford, the classic example, started producing the Model T, he famously said he wanted to build a motor car for the great multitude. He succeeded. The price of a Model T fell from $850 in 1908 to under $300 by the 1920s, putting car ownership within the reach of average Americans. This pattern repeated itself in product after product. Radios, refrigerators, washing machines, and later televisions all transitioned from luxury items to mass-market necessities thanks to assembly line efficiencies. The result was a burgeoning consumer economy where households could buy labor-saving appliances and personal conveniences en masse. In 1925, the magazine Collier's observed, quote, "We are on the verge of a new industrial era where the question is no longer what can be manufactured, but how to make enough for all who want to buy." The flood of standardized goods created the concept of consumer culture. People began to define their lifestyles by the products they owned, and those products were uniform. One could visit any middle-class home in the 1950s and see the same Ford or Chevrolet in the driveway, the same Kelvinator, fridge in the kitchen. I've heard of Ford and Chevrolet, but Kelvinator, never heard of that. The same Zenith television in the living room, a testament to mass production. I've heard of Zenith. They still making stuff? I feel like I haven't heard of Zenith in a while. You buy a TV, it's always going to be Samsung or LG or what's that cheaper one? I was in the store the other day, I saw an absolutely massive television. For some reason, I buy almost everything online. But sometimes I just like to go in electronic stores and just wander around and look at the new technological wonders. There was a television, it must have been 150 inches. It's just absolutely massive. And I couldn't believe, it was expensive. I think it was, $7,000-8,000, something like that. But the fact that you can, at a consumer level, buy something that huge and that impressive for, a lot of money, but also relatively not, it's really kind of crazy. Mass production both fed and fed on consumer demand. It's nicely written. As factories produced more, prices dropped, which in turn encouraged more consumption. This was economies of scale in action. In the 1950s and 60s, productivity gains from improved assembly lines contributed to unprecedented economic growth and rising living standards in industrialized nations. Households filled with goods that would have astonished previous generations. The American suburb, for example, was built on the backbone of mass-produced houses, using assembly line methods in construction filled with mass-produced goods, with families driving mass-produced cars. It's interesting. I've never really lived in the suburbs. I'm not really sure. We do have suburbs in the UK, kind of like mass-produced housing estates sort of situation. Never lived in one. But I remember going on holiday one time. We were staying in, I don't know, some resort. I was a kid somewhere, some like holiday village. And it had all of these villas. And they were all kind of the same. And I remember I made friends with some other kid on holiday, as you want to do. And I remember going to their holiday villa and I was like, whoa, it's exactly the same. And I'd never really seen this before, but it was and then there were other ones that were kind of just the mirror of it. And I'm like, that's really efficient. Just designing a house once, mirroring it, and then just building a bunch like that. And then there were, smaller ones and bigger ones that were the same core house design, just with, I don't know, an extra bedroom thrown on the side, or the garage. Probably not a garage, this was on holiday. That sort of thing. It was a long time ago. Some historians, like David Potter, dubbed this phenomenon the people of plenty, noting how abundance of goods shaped American values and even foreign policy, pushing for open markets for those goods abroad. Wow, how times are changing, given the, I'm recording this just during the tariff times. However, this consumer cornucopia had side effects. Critics like economist John Kenneth Galbraith pointed out how companies now had to stimulate artificial demand for the plethora of goods, the birth of modern advertising, essentially teaching people to want the output of ever more efficient factories. Sounds like the beginning of that movie Fight Club, where he's is that the one where it's do your things own you, or do you own your things? And it's yeah, often your things own you, don't they? You got those payments you got to make, you got to go to work, you got to do stuff. I don't know, I don't mind it. I don't really mind it at all. It's part of modern society. I like owning things. I'm not one of these, minimalist don't own things types. It's nice to have things. But it's interesting how life wasn't really like that for a long time. And then modern consumerism came along. And this piece is written, it seems, for an American perspective. But sure is true where I grew up in the UK. People buy things, lots and lots of things. The concept of planned obsolescence also emerged. To keep assembly lines rolling, companies like General Motors in the 1920s began introducing yearly model changes to encourage consumers to buy new cars, even if their old ones still ran. Alfred P. Sloan of GM famously implemented the annual model refresh, saying, "Today, the appearance of our cars is changed annually. properly controlled, the economic and social consequences should be advantageous. This was a stark shift in mentality of durable, long-lasting goods to one of constant renewal, filling landfills with last year's model. The social critics of the mid-20th century, from the Frankfurt School philosophers to novelists like Ray Bradbury, sometimes portrayed this mass consumption as hollow and conformist. For example, identical tract homes and cars, citizens as passive consumers. I mean, I understand, you can design your own home or move into a unique home or something like that. I think I've never lived in a mass-designed home, as I mentioned, but cars, slightly more tricky. No one's designing their own cars, unless you're like a billionaire or something. You go over to Rolls-Royce and they'll just make whatever the hell you want. Still, to the majority, and the tangible benefits of affordable products were unquestionably positive. A 1950s family could, for instance, keep food fresh in a fridge and travel freely by car, conveniences that would not exist without assembly line efficiencies. The changing nature of work, workers, wages, and unions. If mass production created a consumer class, it also created a new working class and changed the experience of work itself. The early assembly line workers often faced grueling conditions, repetitive tasks, high speed, close supervision. In the 1910s and 20s, many criticized the assembly line for turning men into automatons. An observer in 1922 noted, "In the Ford plant, the men are like machines. They do the same thing over and over, 100 times a day. They have no chance to think." This de-skilling of labor, just a personal comment here. I have had jobs which were very repetitive, and I've had jobs, probably like the one I do today, which are not repetitive at all. The ones I really hated are the ones that are just in between. Like when something's really repetitive, you can just kind of turn off your brain. Like I remember I've delivered newspapers, and you're just wandering around delivering newspapers in your own little world, just thinking about your own things. Stacking shelves, you're just thinking about your own things. But then I remember I worked at a till, a checkout, I think is what Americans call it, in a supermarket. And this was the worst because I'd much rather be stacking shelves because it had just the right amount or wrong amount of brain usage. It would be just different enough each time. Like maybe someone's buying a pear and you need to weigh the pear on the scales, or someone's buying alcohol and you need to ask them for their ID because they look a little bit young and stuff like that. Too much stimulation so that you couldn't turn off and go into your own little world, but not enough stimulation, not busy enough to make the time pass quickly. So some people would like working on the tills. You'd get to sit down, and I'd always be like, nah, I just want to stack shelves, because then I could just think about my own shit. I can just go off into my own little world and just have a think about, whatever. Probably what I'm going to eat for lunch. I remember lunch break, and that job was a big thing. I'd go upstairs. Someone would have no doubt borrowed a copy of The Sun, a British tabloid, from the newspaper section, and I'd sit up there. I'd usually not buy a sandwich because the sandwiches were expensive, And I remember I was making £4.86 an hour, and a sandwich would be like $2.99. And I was like, could have a sandwich for $2.99. That's like 45 minutes work. Or I could buy a bagel. I think a bagel was like 50p, and some cheap Sainsbury's own cream cheese. And I'd use a little knife from the kitchen upstairs, cut open that bagel, put the cream cheese on there, and it was like 90p. I'm glad that that's not what I'm doing these days. It's almost lunchtime. I'm actually quite hungry. My internet's been down the whole morning. Just been sitting here without internet. It's quite nice because then I'm not distracted and I'm just doing work, although I just got a notification on my phone, so maybe my internet's back up. I don't get mobile phone reception in my office. It's semi-submerged, like a half-basement sort of situation, so the mobile phone reception in here is real dodgy. Sorry, we were talking about assembly lines. That was a long tangent, something else. The de-skilling of labour was a conscious strategy of industrialists. By simplifying jobs, they could hire cheaper, unskilled labour instead of artisans. It also made jobs less satisfying and sometimes less safe. Early lines could cause injuries from the relentless pace or monotony-induced mistakes. The human cost of assembly line work became a central issue for labour movements. Workers began to organise and demand better pay, to share in the productivity gains and better conditions. Henry Ford's $5 a day was one response, but Ford also notoriously fought unionization for decades. I mean, you can not want unionization, and you can still do right by your workers. I feel if you do right by your workers, they're less likely to want to unionize. At the Ford River Rouge plant, this is something I know nothing about. I run like a small company. Maybe it's different. I don't work in a job that could be unionized. It's just not something I deal with. It's probably more complicated than I'm putting across, almost certainly. Otherwise, it would be a open and shut issue, wouldn't it? At the Ford River Rouge plant in 1937, security forces brutally beat United Auto Workers, UAW organizers, in the infamous Battle of the Overpass. Eventually, the tide turned. The UAW successfully organized workers at General Motors in the Flint sit-down strike of 1936-37. The Ford Motor Company recognized that union in 1941. With collective bargaining, assembly line workers in the post-war era achieved something remarkable: middle-class incomes for factory work. Especially in the US, a unionized auto worker or steel worker could afford a house, a car, and a comfortable life, the archetype of the blue-collar middle class. This was a direct outcome of the productivity of assembly lines because each worker's output was so high, companies could afford higher wages without necessarily raising prices. Complicated though, because, I don't know, if I was Henry Ford, Henry Ford's a great example of why the situation's more complicated than this, because if he pays his workers more, his competition have to pay their workers more, and that means more people can afford a Model T, which all feeds back into, more production for Henry Ford. But if I were Henry Ford, I'd be thinking, I could keep wages the same and distribute more profit to my shareholders, as a business is supposed to do. But like I say, more complicated, because happy workers, it's a good thing. As Henry Ford himself reasoned, paying workers well also meant they could buy more products, fueling demand. Exactly. And what the text doesn't mention there is the pressure on the competitor employers to also raise the wages, because otherwise they're going to go work for Ford instead. And that means more money to the common man. And that means more common men buying more cars for the common man, like the Model T. Yet the labour victories didn't erase the daily reality of the work. Many workers still found assembly line jobs dull or stressful. Sociologist Harry Braverman in the 70s argued that the specialization of tasks, de-skilling, robbed work of its craft and joy, leaving only the alienation that Karl Marx had warned about a century earlier. The idea that a worker on an assembly line might be estranged from the product of his labour. He only sees a piece of it, not the whole, and from his own creative potential. Alienation on the assembly line became a theme in culture. One sees it in the empty stares of workers in Diego Rivera's famous Detroit industry murals, or in the dark satire of modern times. Is that Charlie Chaplin movie? On the other hand, some workers took pride in being part of producing something big. Memoirs of Ford line workers often recall the sense of camaraderie on the line and the gratification of seeing a finished car, knowing that you played a role. Yeah, I would fall into the latter camp. I like to think I'm a reasonably intelligent person who would be kind of bored by monotonous work, but I'm also really industrious. I just like doing things. I like making things. And I think I'd be like, yeah, cool. Guys, we made that car. We made that car in 90 seconds or whatever it was. I know it wasn't that fast back for the Model T, but even today I'd be like, we did that. The advent of lean manufacturing in the late 20th century
tried to address some of these issues by involving workers in problem solving through quality circles and suggestion programs and job rotation to reduce monotony. Toyota's system, for instance, gives workers opportunities to learn multiple skills and even halts production for 1 to 2 shifts for training every month, something Western observers noted contributed to higher morale and engagement. Nonetheless, the fundamental of assembly line work, doing structured tasks repeatedly, remains. Today, the debate continues. As automation increases, will the remaining human jobs on the line be more interesting as humans do the tricky stuff, or will it further reduce opportunities for human labor? The concept of Industry 5.0 explicitly aims to make manufacturing more human-centric, enhancing rather than diminishing the role of people. This could mean designing work that is less about mindless repetition and more about oversight, creativity, and interaction with advanced tools. Another labor aspect is the global shift of assembly line jobs. In the late 20th century, seeking lower costs, many companies moved production to countries with cheaper labor and often less regulated working conditions. The result was the rise of colossal factories in places like Mexico's maquiladoras, maybe, not sure on the pronunciation there, Bangladesh's garment workshops, and China's manufacturing cities. This globalization of manufacturing delivered even cheaper goods to consumers in rich countries, but sparked new labor concerns. Stories emerged of sweatshop conditions, whether it was Nike shoes made by overworked Indonesian workers in the 90s, or the harrowing reports of Foxconn electronic plants in the 2010s. Foxconn, which assembles devices for Apple, HP, and others in giant Chinese factories, came under scrutiny when a spate of worker suicides occurred around 2010. Investigations found employees working excessive overtime, living in crowded dormitories, and experiencing intense pressure to keep up with quotas. The company infamously installed suicide nets outside dorm buildings to prevent desperate leaps. Wow, I thought that was an urban legend, but apparently not. Got a reference here. Wow. Okay. Although Foxconn raised wages and improved conditions after the public outcry, it remains a symbol of the human cost that can underpin seemingly sleek and benign gadgets. As one journalist put it, the suicide nets are still there. In 2013, a stark reminder hanging over the planet of slums that feeds the new economy's appetite for electronics. Labor movements and NGOs now push for ethical supply chains, and companies claim to audit factories for compliance, but enforcement is inconsistent. The truth is that much of the world's mass production still relies on relatively low-paid labor working in conditions that, while improved from a century ago, might not meet the standards of developed nations' workers or the ethics of people in developed countries. And I mean, I like to think that I'm a reasonably ethical person, and I still use an iPhone. There was that fascinating statistic that was recently released where they said the cost of manufacturing an iPhone in America instead of China, this was around the new tariffs that were going into place, was like $3,500. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I'm an ethical person, but I like to think I'm somewhat of an ethical person. But $3,500 for an iPhone compared to $1,000, that's a hell of a difference. And it's not just iPhones, of course. Globalization and the race to the bottom and back. Mass production has always had a global dimension. In the early 20th century, industrialized countries exported goods worldwide, and by mid-century, some developing nations started their own industries with foreign help. But it was the late 20th century wave of free trade and liberalization that truly globalized the assembly line. Companies realized they could break up the value chain, design products in one country, fabricate components in another, assemble in a third, and sell globally. A famous example of this is the iPhone. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I mean, it says designed in California on the box of every one. Designed in California, assembled in China. It uses chips from the US and Taiwan, memory from Korea, sensors from Europe, and is assembled in China, a complex web of production made possible by the modular nature of modern assembly lines. This globalization of production lines had winners and losers. Consumers in rich nations benefited from cheaper goods. Corporations enjoyed reduced costs and higher profits. Newly industrializing countries, the Asian tigers like South Korea and later China, gained jobs and know-how, lifting millions from poverty through manufacturing. But manufacturing jobs in older industrial regions declined sharply. Cities like Detroit, once humming with auto assembly lines, saw plants close and jobs move abroad from the 1980s onward. The deindustrialization of parts of the US Midwest and UK Midlands led to economic hardship in those communities, what some call the Rust Belt effect. I heard the term Rust Belt, but I didn't know where that came from. For some reason in my mind, I thought it was to do with soil or something. Like, I don't know, this big stretch of America where the soil was like clay red or something, but obviously that was stupid, and I now know why. Interestingly, the quest for ever cheaper labor sometimes ran into obstacles of productivity and quality. It turns out not every country could easily replicate the efficiencies of Japan or the US simply by having an assembly line. Good infrastructure, stable logistics, and skilled managers still matter. In recent years, wages in China have risen, closing some of the cost gap. Some companies have started reshoring manufacturing or moving to even cheaper locales like Vietnam or Bangladesh. Yet labor cost is not everything. Automation is counterweight. Some manufacturers choose to bring production back to high-wage countries, but with highly automated lines, a strategy sometimes called lights-out manufacturing when it's fully automated. Oh, that's a clever name, because you wouldn't need lights on in the factory because the machines don't have eyes. The global map of production is thus always in flux, driven by a mix of wage differentials, trade policies, automation, tech, and risk considerations, natural disasters, geopolitical tensions, these sorts of things. We also see efforts to spread the gains of production lines more widely. Countries in Africa and South Asia, for example, aspire to develop more manufacturing. The assembly line remains a kind of ladder to economic development, one that Japan, then Korea, Taiwan, and China climbed, and others aim to follow. But in an age of automation, the question looms, will latecomer countries have the same opportunity to employ millions in factories, or will robots do much of the work by then? Policy-wise, some economists suggest that a degree of local manufacturing is healthy for innovation and security, hence talk of moving some production of critical goods like semiconductors back onshore. Yeah, the risk of, I can't remember what the stat is, but a vast percentage of global chip supply is out of Taiwan, which is facing a bit of an existential threat at the moment from China. It has been for a long time and probably will for a long time still. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed how global production lines can be vulnerable. For example, when Chinese factories shut down, it created supply shortages worldwide. This has prompted discussions of supply chain resilience, which might lead to production lines being duplicated in multiple regions to hedge against disruptions.
Environmental impact, the hidden cost, and sustainable solutions. Mass production and mass consumption have left a significant environmental footprint. The very concept of an assembly line implies using large amounts of raw material and energy to churn out goods at a high volume. Over the 20th century, this contributed to resource depletion, forests being logged for wood pulp, mountains mined for metals, and pollution, factories emitting smoke, dumping chemicals. One glaring example is the automobile. The assembly line made car ownership ubiquitous, which in turn led to sprawling cities, oil consumption, and carbon emissions on a huge scale. Indeed, lead was a big problem for a long time. You know how, I don't know if you Americans call it this, but we have unleaded fuel in the UK. And this was because lead was being added to fuel as an anti-knocking agent, something that made cars live longer for a really long time. And it was spewing all of this lead into the atmosphere, which I think made people dumb. I think there was a drop in IQ all around the world because people just were breathing in lead as children and becoming more stupid or something like that. That's not in what I'm reading, it's not in the script, but I vaguely remember making a video about that sometime. Factory operations themselves can be polluting. In earlier decades, industrial centres like the Great Lakes region or the Ruhr Valley were notoriously smoggy and their rivers foul. Yeah, not to mention London, like Industrial Revolution London, the big smoke. Environmental regulation has since improved conditions in many Western industrial regions. The Cuyahoga River in Ohio, probably getting the pronunciation on that terribly wrong. Cuyahoga, something like that. It no longer catches fire as it did in 1969 due to factory waste. Good Lord. That is some serious levels of pollution right there. But as manufacturing shifted to developing countries, often environmental controls lagged. We saw terrible industrial smog episodes in Chinese cities in the 2000s and rivers in Southeast Asia laden with dye from textile plants. Some assembly and manufacturing processes inherently produce toxic byproducts. For example, electronics assembly uses solvents and solders with heavy metals that can contaminate water if not handled properly. I was soldering a little piece of electronics. I sometimes make things, and I was soldering some electronics for the first time in a very long time. And I was thinking about like, oh, I'm doing this inside. There's this like smoke coming off the solder, which I'm breathing in. I'm like, it's probably not brilliant, is it? I should probably be doing this in an environment that's better ventilated than just my home office. The throwaway culture, encouraged by mass cheap production, also means more waste. Landfills are filled with discarded appliances, fast fashion garments, and single-use packaging. Electronic waste, e-waste, has become a global problem. Millions of old phones, computers, and gadgets, often filled with hazardous materials, are tossed annually, sometimes shipped to poorer countries where informal workers break them down under unsafe conditions. Yeah, I think it's just something we try not to think about in the West, isn't it? You know, a new iPhone every year or two. Well, new iPhones every year. I think I get a new iPhone usually every couple of years, something like that, and then usually the other ones get passed on. The older one gets passed on to my wife, which I guess then eventually I would say it gets shipped off to, some developing country to be taken apart by an informal worker without protection gear. But I think the reality is most of my old phones are probably just sitting in a box somewhere because I couldn't be bothered to throw them away. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I think I've got everything going back to like an iPhone 3, 4, 5. Then they skipped some. Goals of those. I suppose I should get rid of them. But where do you put them? Where do you throw them away? And then you do throw them away, and then you're just making them someone else's problem. I think I'll just wait till I'm dead, and then it becomes my children's problem. Like my parents often joke about, they're not going to sort out the attic. That's our job as children once they're dead. Grim. One major push is for a circular economy where products at end of life are recycled or remanufactured rather than thrown away. Many companies are now designing products with disassembly in mind so materials can be recovered and setting up take-back programs. I'm always very skeptical of those, though. Anyone else? We talk about that phone going off to some developing country. I always feel the take-back programs, isn't that just what they're doing? They're just taking your stuff and doing the exact same thing as if you chuck it in the electronics recycling box or whatever. For instance, some car manufacturers have nearly 95% recycling by weight for their vehicles. Metals are reclaimed, plastics recycled where possible. Lean manufacturing focuses on eliminating waste, which aligns with environmental goals of cutting scrap and energy use. Efficiency improvements spurred by cost-cutting often yield environmental benefits, using fewer materials per product, consuming less energy per unit output, etc. A report from ABB, I don't know what that is, American Business Bureau? Maybe? I'm totally guessing. Am I thinking of BBB, the Better Business Bureau, which we call in the UK Trading Standards? I knew it would come to me. in 2024 noted that 44% of businesses saw waste reduction and 49% saw energy efficiency improvements as a result of investing in circularity initiatives. Many big manufacturers have announced targets to use renewable energy in factories and cut carbon emissions. For example, some assembly plants are covered in solar panels or use wind energy. Green manufacturing initiatives include things like switching to water-based paints to reduce toxic fumes in car plants, or using closed-loop water systems so the factory discharges minimal wastewater. Another concept that's emerging is Industry 4.0 for sustainability, using IoT sensors to monitor and optimize energy usage. IoT, Internet of Things. It's interesting here, it's written IoT without explanation as to what that means. I feel like I didn't know what IoT meant until relatively recently. Smart factories can, for instance, power down idle equipment automatically or use AI to schedule energy-intensive processes at times of low grid demand. Yeah, like, I don't know, I've got an electric car. Charge it at night. Less demand on the grid, better time to charge. I think I also get a discount on the electricity, right? Slightly cheaper at night? Might not be. I don't even know, to be honest. Some factories even reuse the heat from machinery, like exothermic heat of a glass-making line, to help heat their buildings or nearby homes. Regulation and consumer pressure also play roles. International standards like ISO 14001 push companies towards better environmental management on their production lines. Consumers are increasingly asking for eco-friendly products, which indirectly pressure manufacturers to clean up their processes. You can't really have a green product if it's built in a highly polluting way. In terms of resource usage, companies are mindful that many materials, rare earth metals, certain minerals, are finite or sourced from conflict areas. I think cobalt's a big example of that, right? Cobalt mining in, I want to say the DRC, Democratic Republic of the Congo, but I'm not sure. Artisanal miners, it's a grim industry. This has led to efforts to find alternative materials or more efficient usage. For example, lean principles help minimize overproduction, which not only saves money but also avoids unnecessary resource use. A survey of industrial businesses found that 92% feeling the effects of resource scarcity, motivating 67% to invest more in circularity, recycling, reusing materials within the next few years. Executives increasingly recognize that, quote, our current way of life is depleting resources at an unsustainable rate, that embracing circular practices is essential for resilience. I think what that executive is probably realizing. I don't know. I don't have a lot of faith in companies. I think companies are no, I'm not one of these people that like companies are evil or companies are good. I just think companies are companies. They're profit driven. I don't think this executive, whoever he is, I don't have a quote. I don't have a source for the quote, unfortunately. I've got a link, but it's dead. I think executives are focused on profit, but the good thing is if consumers are demanding green, then the businesses will follow to give the consumers what they want, so they keep buying more of their products. One can envision future assembly lines that are zero waste and carbon neutral, factories powered entirely by renewable energy, using materials sourced sustainably, where each product at the end of life is returned to be disassembled by another automated line into raw materials for new products. This is the ambition of movements like cradle-to-cradle manufacturing. Some industries, closer than others, aluminium production, for example, already heavily relies on recycling scrap aluminium, which only uses 5% of the energy of producing new aluminium. That's right, aluminium is produced through the electrolysis process, right? Fun fact about aluminium. Before they worked out how to kind of extract it from dirt or whatever they're doing with electrolysis, essentially kind of bringing it out of, I don't know if it's an ore or whatever, but aluminium was incredibly rare. And so back in the day, like the wealthy would have aluminium plates instead of gold or silver as a way of showing off And now it comes in a roll in our kitchen that we used to wrap around a chicken and then throw away afterwards. Perhaps one day cars or smartphones will be made from largely recycled predecessors on assembly lines, closing the loop. The production line today and tomorrow, smart, connected, and human-centric. As we step into the third decade of the 20th century, the production line is once again reinventing itself. Buzzwords are now Industry 4.0, smart factories, digital twins, and on the horizon, Industry 5.0. While past innovations focused on mechanical efficiency and lean processes, today's focus is on connectivity, data, and integrating the power of computation and AI into manufacturing. Their goal is to make production lines more flexible, more intelligent, resilient, able to quickly adapt to new designs or changes, optimize themselves, even learn. At the same time, there's a counter trend emphasizing the role of humans in the loop, ensuring that automation serves people, not just the other way around. Let's explore how these trends are shaping modern assembly lines and what the future might hold. Industry 4.0, the digital assembly line. Industry 4.0 is often called the fourth industrial revolution, following mechanization, electrification, and computerization. Interesting. I'd kind of feel that this would then be 3.0. What's the difference between computerization and a digital assembly line? Well, I suppose we're about to be told, aren't we? So let's get into this. On an Industry 4.0 assembly line, all machines, products, and even workers may be equipped with sensors and connected to the Internet of Things. Data flows constantly from the shop floor to cloud servers or local edge computers that analyze it and make adjustments. For example, each workstation might broadcast its status, how many units completed, if there's a fault, the exact torque applied on each bolt, temperature readings, etc. I was struggling with torque the other day. I was replacing a steering wheel in a car. Well, like with the electronics, I like tinkering with things. I have a car that I gradually tinker on. And this steering wheel was absolutely bolted onto this like you wouldn't believe. I'm using like a big wrench trying to get it off, and eventually I have to get my wrench. And then I find a big steel pipe that I was lurking around my garden after we had some construction work done, and I managed to loop it through part of the wrench, and then I'm kind of just, doing that Archimedes thing, grabbing it right on the ends and pulling it down, and eventually it pops right off. Couldn't believe how much torque had been applied to that. Supervisors can monitor the whole factory in real time on dashboards, but beyond monitoring, the systems can make decisions. An AI algorithm might detect a certain station is running slower and automatically reroute tasks to a parallel station. Or it might predict that a machine is likely to fail in 10 hours based on vibration patterns and schedule maintenance during the next break. This is known as predictive maintenance and is a major benefit of IoT data. Yeah, it's like, I'd be afraid of that. It's like when you're driving and the yellow check engine light comes on and you're like, oh, my car seems to be driving fine. What does it think is wrong? And then you take it to the mechanic and they're always like, they use that a magical computer on it, and they're like, ooh, bad news. Check engine light, never good news. Number of cars I get in, like Ubers and stuff, whereas like the check engine light is just constantly on. Surprisingly high. A concrete example, Bosch, the German manufacturer, has a brake assembly factory in Bavaria, highlighted as a model smart factory. There, IoT sensors track each step of assembly and the movement of parts. The factory uses augmented reality for training and maintenance. Workers with AR glasses can see overlay instructions on complex assemblies or get alerts if a part is incorrect. That is super cool. Digital twins of each assembly station allow engineers to simulate changes. According to a report, using IoT monitoring helped one manufacturer reduce energy consumption on its production line significantly by optimizing when machines idle or power down between tasks. Another hallmark of Industry 4.0 is customization. Traditional lines excel at uniform products, but Industry 4.0 aims for mass customization, being able to produce lots and lots of variants or even one-of-a-kind items without losing efficiency. This is achieved through flexibility, robots that can be reprogrammed on the fly, 3D printing of certain components on demand, and modular production units. For instance, smart assembly robots might automatically change their gripper tool and program for when the next unit coming down the line is a different model. The vision is a factory where you could drop a design file into the system and the line configures itself to make that item with minimal human intervention. Digital twin technology is particularly interesting for assembly lines. A digital twin is a virtual model of the production line, or even of each product as it's being built, which mirrors the physical process. It allows a simulation of what-if scenarios. If you increase the line speed by 10%, will quality suffer? If a new model variant is introduced, where might bottlenecks occur? The twin, fed by live data from IoT sensors, stays in sync with reality, so it can also be used for real-time optimization, essentially running a parallel virtual assembly line to fine-tune the real one. General Electric is using digital twins in their turbine assembly to predict performance of each unit during build. In automotive, digital twins can simulate stress tests on a car as it's built, rather than waiting for a physical prototype. Gosh, technology is really cool. The fact that this can all just be done in a simulation now, it's really quite amazing. Do you think we'll still be crashing cars in a few years? You know, they do those NCAP safety tests where they like smash them up and roll them around and all of this stuff. I feel like, you know, eventually they'll just put it all in a computer and run every crash test possible. They don't need to smash up any cars, or at least not as many. Maybe they're doing it already. From a data perspective, factories now generate big data. Companies like Siemens and IBM offer manufacturing execution systems, or MES, and AI platforms that crunch this data to find patterns. Machine learning might discover, for example, that a slight change in humidity correlates with a higher defect rate in painting, leading to installation of better climate control. Or it might identify that a particular part from supplier X consistently takes longer to assemble than the same part from supplier Y, prompting a quality improvement talk with the supplier. I think the paint example there's a pretty obvious one. Like, lower humidity is going to lead to a better paint job. What would be really interesting in these things is spotting the things that seem very not counterintuitive, but that you wouldn't necessarily think about or spot normally. You know, the weird things. In a sense, the assembly line is becoming as much a software system as a hardware one. Cybersecurity has even become a concern, protecting networked production lines from hacking or disruption. Yeah, there was the famous uranium enrichment situation, and was it Mossad, Israel's security service? They've got a virus into their centrifuges and got it basically to break them all, which was pretty interesting. And that was a while ago. Obviously a bit more high stakes than making a Toyota. All this said, many factories are still in the early stages of implementing Industry 4.0, upgrading legacy equipment to be sensor-equipped, training staff in data analytics, and ensuring interoperability are non-trivial tasks. Small and medium enterprises in particular may lag behind giant firms like Siemens or Bosch in these investments. Nonetheless, this trend is set. Globally, robot density in factories has doubled in the last 7 years and continues to rise, and IoT devices in manufacturing are exploding in numbers. We're likely to see the assembly line become ever more adaptive. Future lines may not run at a fixed speed. Instead, they'll dynamically adjust speed based on real-time demand and workforce conditions. For instance, slowing slightly if workers need a break, or if a part delivery is delayed, then speeding up to catch up, all autonomously. In essence, the linear rigid assembly line is evolving into an intelligent network. Industry 5.0, bringing back the human touch. Even as Industry 4.0 unfolds, Thought leaders are already talking about Industry 5.0, a vision that explicitly recenters manufacturing around human values and needs. The European Commission and others have promoted Industry 5.0 as going beyond efficiency to emphasize human centricity, sustainability, and resilience. So, in practical terms, what might Industry 5.0 actually look like? Yeah, so far, it just feels like a lot of corporate-y words. Manufacturing around human values and needs feels very corporate buzzword, doesn't it? Firstly, it involves closer collaboration between humans and robots. Instead of segregated roles, humans and machines work together on tasks, each complementing the other. For instance, an assembly line for a complex product, say a customized piece of industrial equipment, might have a human expert working alongside an AI assistant. The AI could handle information retrieval, calculations, or precise alignments with a robotic arm, while the human makes judgments, does fine manipulation, and provides creativity for any custom fitting. This is already seen in some advanced manufacturing of low-volume, highly complex items like aerospace components, where technicians team up with automated systems. Secondly, Industry 5.0 emphasizes the well-being of workers. This could mean designing production lines that are ergonomically optimal, using exoskeletons to eliminate heavy lifting. Cool. It's like skills like Iron Man style people rolling around a factory and reducing repetitive strain. It can mean giving workers more autonomy and input, essentially undoing some of the strict regimentation of classic assembly lines. If Industry 4.0 gives operators real-time data, Industry 5.0 empowers them to use it. We might see assembly line workers with more decision-making power, perhaps deciding when the line should slow down to ensure quality or switching tasks to keep engaged. Admittedly, this sounds idealistic given the reality of many factories. Yeah, I'm just thinking. It does sound pretty idealistic, and I feel, I don't know, factories and companies, I feel if they didn't have to have workers involved, then they wouldn't have to worry about ergonomics and all of this stuff. I feel they're much more, profit-driven to kind of remove people from the equation rather than reintroduce them in some way, even though I think that's probably the way to get the best quality products. But the idea is to treat workers not as cogs in the machine, but as critical thinkers on the factory floor. A study on Industry 5.0 noted that despite advances, workers sometimes feel relegated to just monitoring Industry 4.0. Industry 5.0 aims to reintegrate their creative problem solving by having them work closely with AI and robots that can handle drudgery. In Industry 5.0, training and skills development are continuous. Instead of doing one task repetitively, workers might rotate through different aspects of production or through operating various advanced tools. Technologies like augmented reality can assist in this. Imagine a worker with AI glasses that visually guides them through a new assembly procedure step by step, allowing upskilling on the job very, very quickly. Yeah, I do think, AR and VR and AI are going to be the incredible learning tools. I was soldering that thing the other day, and I was looking at the various ports on the chip, and I was like, oh, I don't know which one this solders onto. There seem to be two that are identical. So I just go on and I ask ChatGPT, is it the one on the outside or the one closer to the inside? And it knows what chip I'm using. It knows everything. And then it's just like, oh, it's the inside one. And it explains why. And I'm like, okay, cool. And off I go with my soldering. Afterwards, it asked me if I could take a picture to make sure I did it right. And I'm like, nah, I followed the instructions. I think we're good. Another aspect is personalization in manufacturing, sometimes described as batches of one. Industry 5.0 envisions satisfying individual customer needs through production, which ironically brings back a bit of the artisan ethos, but enabled by high-tech means. For example, a clothing assembly line might produce a garment tailored exactly to one person's body scan, or a car assembly line might allow a buyer to customize interior layouts that are then assembled uniquely. That'd be so cool.
I really look forward to just the clothes that are made from a body scan. Like, I don't know, finding clothes that just fit perfectly or going to a tailor, a real pain in the bottom. If I could just have a body scan, like in one of those airport machines, where you put your arms up and you stand and it goes like one of those. And then they'll just be like, okay, cool, we made some jeans. I'd be like, fantastic. That would be quite incredible. Does that exist? I wish that existed. This demands flexible lines and a workforce adept at handling uniqueness without losing efficiency. Sustainability and resilience in Industry 5.0 mean production lines should not only be efficient in resource use, but also capable of quickly switching to new products, like ramping up mask production during a pandemic or coping with supply chain shocks, perhaps by 3D printing plots on site if suppliers fail. Humans in the loop provide adaptability that fully automated systems lack. That's a key argument for not removing people entirely. A human can find a clever workaround for a supply shortage or a design flaw on the fly, whereas a rigid automated line might just stop. One tangible example on the horizon is biomanufacturing and artisanal foods. What's this? Is this where we're growing meat in a lab and such things? Am I going to get a personalized steak? That'd be great. Industry 5.0 may blend craft and automation. Think of a brewery production line. Traditionally a mix of automated brewing kettles, but also brewmasters adjusting recipes. As technology advances, even something like craft beer brewing or gourmet chocolate making could incorporate Industry 5.0 principles, where the expertise of the human is augmented by data from sensors that track fermentation or flavor compounds, achieving quality and consistency without replacing the brewmaster's art. The production line in such cases might be semi-automated with frequent human tweaking, a departure from the set it and let it run mentality of earlier lines. It's interesting. It does feel like this is almost a little bit of a step backwards in a way, doesn't it? To quote an Industry 5.0 proponent, it recognizes the limits of total automation and seeks to maximize the added value of human labor, a human-centric industry. This suggests that even as AI and robots become more capable, there's an understanding that human creativity, adaptability, and craftsmanship remain valuable, and the best outcomes arise when these human qualities are integrated with advanced production tech. Towards sustainable and resilient production lines. Looking forward, the ultimate assembly line might be one that not only operates efficiently, but is also sustainable, environmentally and socially, as well as being resilient to disruptions. We touched on sustainability already. Future production lines will likely use greener energy. Many factories are aiming for carbon neutral operations by 2030 or 40, produce less waste, and be part of circular ecosystems. For example, an electric vehicle battery assembly line might be paired with a battery recycling line next door, so old batteries are dismantled and materials fed back into new battery production. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, everything's elements when it comes down to it. I wonder how much of that is recyclable. Like if you've got a dead battery in an electric car, that's a lot of individual little cells. I wonder how they recycle all of that. Battery recycling, could do a future episode on that. I'm mildly interested. I think it'd be boring enough to suit one of these episodes. This closing of the loop is a significant engineering challenge, especially for complex goods, but progress is being made. Companies like Renault have a refactory where used cars are refurbished or recycled in the same complex that builds new cars, a prototype of circular manufacturing. Renault as a company does some surprisingly, I kind of think, Renault, I can't even name a Renault. They're kind of like the epitome of what I would see as quite boring vehicles. But they also make some really cool stuff. I think I saw a few years ago a pretty incredible video of an automated Renault car, like a self-driving thing that was well ahead of all the competition. Resilience means being able to handle change. The COVID-19 pandemic gave a crash course. Production lines had to cope with workplace shortages due to illness, supply delays. A chip shortage idled many car assembly lines in 2021, for instance, and demand swings. Who knew we'd suddenly need billions of masks? Some pivoted. Distilleries converted bottling lines to hand sanitizer lines. Garment factories switched to making PPE. Flexible manufacturing systems and 3D printing helped in some cases. People 3D printed ventilator parts when stock ran out. The experience is leading manufacturers to consider more modular production lines, which can be reconfigured rapidly. Having multiple qualified suppliers for each part to avoid single points of failure is another strategy, though it sometimes conflicts with just-in-time lean principles and favored sole sourcing for simplicity. In terms of technology aiding resilience, digital supply networks are emerging where factories share data up and down the supply chain. If an earthquake shuts down one plant, others in the network can ramp up and redistribute the work dynamically. It's analogous to how the internet was designed to reroute around node failures. The smart factory grid might do the same for production. For example, if a car factory in one country is knocked out, another factory elsewhere gets the digital instructions, the BOM and assembly recipes via the cloud to produce that model, and perhaps even receive some of the work in progress or parts via expedited shipping to fill orders with minimal delay. This kind of flexibility is challenging. Usually plants are specialized, but Tesla, for instance, has tried to write software so that different models can be built in different plants, if needed, by shifting software configurations. On the social side, sustainable production lines mean treating workers fairly worldwide. Movements for fair trade and ethical manufacturing push brands to ensure that the people making their products, whether in an Indonesian Nike supplier or a Bangladeshi garment line, have safe conditions and living wages. Technology might help here too. Some companies experiment with blockchain to verify supply chain labor practices. Consumers, armed with more info, may start to demand ethically assembled products like they do organic food. It's a slow shift, but some industries, like electronics, are under pressure to avoid conflict minerals and child labor. For example, ensuring cobalt for batteries isn't mined by children in Congo, which then extends to who assembles the battery. Finally, education and society's perception of manufacturing needs to evolve to support the future assembly line. In many developed countries, younger people have steered away from factory work, seeing it as dirty or dull. But the factories of the future are high-tech environments that need skills in mechatronics, programming, data analysis, and also teamwork and problem-solving. Programs to train digital craftsmen are emerging, combining traditional mechanical skills with programs to train digital craftsmen, combining traditional mechanical skills with IT know-how. As Industry 5.0 highlights, humans are still the real drivers of innovation on production lines. Ensuring a steady flow of talent into manufacturing is important so that we don't automate simply because of labor shortages or skill gaps. We're getting to the end now. The production line has come a long way from the Qin Dynasty workshops. Seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? And Ford's Highland Park. It has continually adapted through the age of steam, electricity, the computer, and now the cloud. It not only changed how we work and what we can buy, but also how we live and how our society functions. It created wealth and comfort on an unprecedented scale, even as it posed new dilemmas about the meaning of work and the stewardship of our planet's resources. Today's assembly lines are smarter and increasingly connected, yet they still owe a debt to the innovations and the lessons of the past. The fundamental idea remains: organize people and machines to build more, better, and faster than we could alone. As we've seen, this idea has powered societies forward from workshop guilds to the age of Ford and into the silicon-driven present. Now, on the cusp of a new era, the production line is poised to transcend its own history. In a world of intelligent factories and human-centric design, it's no longer just about output at any cost, but about adaptive, responsible manufacturing that serves both people and our planet. The assembly line story, one of relentless improvement and occasional reinvention, reminds us that progress is a moving target. And as the line moves ever onward, carrying the products of tomorrow, it continues to shape our world in profound ways. The beat of the assembly line, once the clang of metal on the factory floor, now the hum of sensors and circuits, remains the heartbeat of modern civilization, driving us into the future, one product at a time. Thank you for listening.